The railroad workers stopped hammering almost at once. One by one, the sounds of steel against iron faded across the Cedar Hollow rail yard until only the distant hiss of a steam locomotive remained. A young railroad worker stood in handcuffs near the freight platform, his face bruised, his clothes covered in coal dust. The sheriff claimed he had sabotaged company property. The railroad company claimed he had stolen payroll money. Witnesses claimed they saw him near the scene. The judge had already arrived to sign the warrant that would send him away for years. It should have been a simple case. Then, as the accused man reached into his pocket to wipe blood from his lip, an old silver pocket watch slipped from his fingers and struck the wooden platform. The judge froze. The entire rail yard fell silent. Because engraved inside that watch was a name the judge had not seen in 25 years, a name belonging to a man officially declared dead. And in that moment, the case stopped being about theft. It became about murder, betrayal, and a secret powerful men had buried beneath the railroad itself. The winter of 1887 arrived early in Cedar Hollow. Snow covered the tracks long before Christmas, and the men working for the Western Frontier Railroad spent most mornings breaking ice before they could begin laying steel. Nathan Cole was already at work before sunrise. At 26 years old, he had become one of the strongest laborers in the county, though few people noticed. Railroad workers were rarely seen as individuals. They were simply part of the machinery that pushed civilization westward. Nathan preferred it that way. He arrived before everyone else, worked harder than most, and left without complaint. His small cabin sat near the edge of town beside a frozen creek. It contained little more than a stove, a bed, a wooden table, and one possession he valued above all others: a silver pocket watch. Every morning he wound it carefully before leaving for work. The watch had belonged to his father, or at least that was what Nathan had always believed. He had no memories of the man. His mother died when he was young and left behind only two things: the watch and a warning: never sell it, never lose it, never let anyone take it. Nathan obeyed without ever understanding why. On that particular morning, he stood beside the stove watching the watch tick steadily in his palm. Snow drifted against the window. The engraving inside the lid had faded over the years, but one line remained visible: to my brother Samuel. May truth survive longer than we do. Nathan had read those words hundreds of times. He still did not know who Samuel was. He closed the watch and slipped it into his vest pocket before heading into the cold. By sunrise, he was working alongside dozens of men at the Northern Rail Extension. The project promised enormous profits for the Western Frontier Railroad. New tracks would connect 3 territories and create one of the largest transportation networks in the region. Company officials visited frequently. Investors arrived almost weekly. Newspapers described the expansion as the future of the American West. Nathan spent little time thinking about any of that. He focused on lifting rails, driving spikes, and earning enough money to survive the winter. Around midday, however, something unusual happened. A black carriage rolled into the worksite carrying 3 company executives. The workers immediately noticed because executives rarely visited without reason. The lead passenger was Victor Langston, regional director of the railroad company. Tall, impeccably dressed, and famous for firing men over minor mistakes, Langston stepped from the carriage and surveyed the workers with visible disappointment, as though manual labor offended him personally. Beside him walked company accountant Harold Briggs, a nervous man carrying several ledgers. The third passenger was unknown to Nathan, but the expensive suit suggested money and influence. Foremen rushed to greet them. Laborers lowered their eyes and returned to work. Nathan did the same. Yet he noticed something others missed. Harold Briggs appeared terrified. The accountant constantly looked over his shoulder. His hands trembled. Twice he nearly dropped the ledger he carried. Whatever brought the executives to the rail yard, it clearly had nothing to do with routine inspections. The answer came shortly before evening. A company payroll chest disappeared. Hundreds of dollars intended for worker wages vanished from a locked office beside the rail station. Panic spread immediately. Foremen searched buildings. Guards questioned employees. Executives demanded answers. The sheriff was summoned. By sunset, every railroad worker in Cedar Hollow had become a suspect. Nathan remained calm. He had spent the entire day laying track alongside 30 witnesses. He assumed the matter would resolve itself. He was wrong. An hour later, 2 deputies entered the bunkhouse carrying lanterns and rifles. Without explanation, they walked directly toward Nathan. Conversation stopped. Men turned to watch. Nathan rose slowly from the table. "Can I help you?" The older deputy grabbed his arm. "Nathan Cole?" "Yes. You're under arrest." Silence filled the room. Nathan blinked. "For what?" "Theft." Several workers immediately protested. Nathan had never stolen so much as a tool in his life. The younger deputy ignored them and produced handcuffs. "You were seen near the payroll office." Nathan frowned. "Everyone was near the payroll office." "You were seen leaving." "I left work." The deputy tightened the cuffs. "Save it for the judge." Nathan looked toward his coworkers. Most appeared shocked. A few looked frightened. One looked guilty. Before Nathan could identify who, the deputies pushed him toward the door. Outside, snow had begun falling again. Workers gathered around lanterns, whispering nervously. Victor Langston stood near the station, watching the arrest with satisfaction. Nathan met his eyes briefly. Something about the executive's expression disturbed him. It was not relief. It was certainty. The kind of certainty a man possesses when events unfold exactly as planned. Nathan suddenly understood something important. This arrest had nothing to do with missing money. Somewhere behind the accusation lay a different purpose entirely. He simply did not know what it was yet. As the deputies led him through town toward the jail, the silver pocket watch rested quietly in his vest pocket, ticking steadily against his chest. Neither Nathan nor anyone else in Cedar Hollow realized that before another week passed, that watch would expose a secret older than the railroad itself and force some of the most powerful men in the territory to answer for crimes committed 25 years earlier. The jail in Cedar Hollow had been built 20 years earlier when the town consisted of little more than a church, a blacksmith shop, and a rail stop. No one had bothered improving it since. The stone walls trapped cold air during winter and heat during summer. The cells smelled of rust, damp wood, and old regrets. Nathan Cole sat alone on a narrow cot staring at the iron bars before him while snow drifted past the small window high above the corridor. He had been locked inside for nearly 3 hours. No formal charges had been presented. No evidence had been shown. Every time he asked a question, the deputies responded with silence. The situation made no sense. Nathan replayed the entire day repeatedly in his mind. He remembered laying track. He remembered seeing the executives arrive. He remembered noticing Harold Briggs acting frightened. Then the payroll chest vanished, and somehow he became the suspect. It happened too quickly, too cleanly, as though someone had decided he would be guilty long before the money disappeared. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Sheriff Walter Boone appeared outside the cell carrying a lantern. The sheriff was a large man with broad shoulders and a face that permanently looked annoyed. He had served in Cedar Hollow for more than a decade and generally preferred avoiding conflict whenever possible. Tonight, however, he looked uncomfortable. "You want to tell me what's happening?" Nathan asked. Boone avoided eye contact. "The company says they have a witness." "Who?" "Can't tell you." "Why not?" "Because they haven't officially testified yet." Nathan laughed bitterly. "So, I'm in jail because of a witness nobody can identify?" Boone shifted uneasily. "The railroad company has influence." "That's not evidence." The sheriff remained silent. Nathan stood from the cot. "You know I didn't steal anything." Boone looked away again. That told Nathan everything he needed to know. The sheriff had doubts, serious doubts. Yet somehow the arrest happened anyway. Before Nathan could press further, another figure appeared at the end of the corridor. Victor Langston. The railroad executive walked toward the cell with the confidence of a man inspecting property he already owned. Sheriff Boone immediately straightened. Nathan watched carefully. Langston smiled politely. "Sheriff." Boone nodded. "Mr. Langston." The executive stepped closer to the bars. His expensive coat looked absurdly clean compared to the rest of Cedar Hollow. Even the snow seemed unwilling to touch him. "Mr. Cole." Nathan folded his arms. "You seem pleased." Langston's smile widened slightly. "A crime was committed." "Naturally, I'm pleased the authorities are taking it seriously." "Funny. You looked pleased before I was arrested." For a moment, the executive's expression hardened. Then the smile returned. "Be careful what conclusions you draw." Nathan stepped closer to the bars. "Why am I really here?" Langston studied him silently. Because circumstances can be unfortunate. That's not an answer. Sometimes it is. Sheriff Boone cleared his throat. That's enough. Langston nodded politely and turned away. Before leaving, however, he glanced toward Nathan's vest hanging on a hook inside the cell. Specifically, he looked at the pocket containing the silver watch. It lasted only a second. Most people would have missed it. Nathan did not. The executive walked away immediately afterward. The sheriff followed. Nathan remained standing in silence. His pulse quickened. That glance had not been accidental. Langston knew something about the watch, or perhaps feared it. For the first time since his arrest, Nathan felt certain the pocket watch and the payroll theft were connected somehow. The question was how. Hours passed. Midnight approached. The jail grew quiet. Nathan eventually sat back down on the cot. He removed the watch from his vest and opened the lid. The familiar engraving reflected lantern light. To my brother Samuel. May truth survive longer than we do. He traced the words with his thumb. Who were you? He whispered. The watch offered no answer. Yet, for the first time in years, Nathan found himself wondering whether the object represented more than a family keepsake. His mother had guarded it obsessively. She refused to discuss its origins. Whenever Nathan asked questions, she changed the subject. Perhaps she had been protecting him from something. A loud knock echoed through the jail. Nathan quickly returned the watch to his pocket. Voices filled the front office. Several minutes later, Sheriff Boone returned looking increasingly uncomfortable. You're getting a hearing tomorrow morning. Nathan frowned. Already? The railroad company requested an emergency review. That seems fast. It is. Nathan studied the sheriff carefully. Who requested the judge? Boone hesitated. Judge Samuel Whitaker happened to be passing through town. Nathan's stomach tightened unexpectedly. He had heard of Whitaker. Nearly everyone had. The judge spent most of his time traveling between territories hearing major legal disputes. Men like him did not usually involve themselves in local theft accusations. Yet somehow he had arrived within hours of the railroad company's request. Another coincidence. Another impossible convenience. Nathan was beginning to suspect the entire situation had been arranged. The following morning, Cedar Hollow woke early. Word of the arrest spread through every street, saloon, boarding house, and church pew. By sunrise, dozens of citizens gathered outside the courthouse. Railroad workers stood alongside merchants and ranchers. Some came out of curiosity. Others came because they knew Nathan personally and could not believe the accusation. Inside the courthouse, tension filled every corner. Victor Langston arrived first, accompanied by Harold Briggs and several company attorneys. Nathan noticed immediately that Briggs looked worse than the previous day. Dark circles surrounded his eyes. His hands shook constantly. Twice he nearly dropped paperwork while entering the building. Whatever frightened the accountant was growing stronger. Nathan was escorted inside wearing handcuffs. Conversations stopped as he entered. Some people looked sympathetic. Others looked uncertain. A few already believed he was guilty. At precisely 9 o'clock, Judge Samuel Whitaker entered the courtroom. Every person immediately stood. Nathan studied the judge carefully. Whitaker appeared older than expected. His gray hair framed a weathered face marked by years of travel and responsibility. Yet his eyes remained sharp. They missed nothing. The judge seated himself and surveyed the room. Let's begin. One by one, the railroad representatives presented their case. Missing money, missing payroll chest, anonymous witness, circumstantial evidence. Nathan listened in disbelief. The accusations sounded convincing until examined closely. No stolen money had been found. No physical evidence connected him to the crime. No witness appeared in person. The entire argument depended on assumptions and rumors. Yet somehow the railroad executives acted completely confident. Eventually the judge turned toward Nathan. Mr. Cole, do you wish to respond? Nathan rose slowly. Yes, Your Honor, proceed. Nathan explained where he had been throughout the day. He named co-workers who could verify his location. He described the sudden nature of the accusation. He pointed out the lack of evidence. The judge listened carefully. Unlike everyone else involved, Whitaker seemed genuinely interested in facts. When Nathan finished, silence settled across the courtroom. Judge Whitaker leaned back thoughtfully. Interesting. Victor Langston immediately stood. Your Honor, the company strongly believes. The judge raised a hand. Langston fell silent. Whitaker looked directly at Nathan. One question. Yes, sir? How long have you owned that pocket watch? Nathan blinked. The question came completely out of nowhere. Slowly he reached into his vest and removed the silver watch. My entire life. The courtroom remained silent. Nathan handed it to the bailiff, who carried it to the judge. Whitaker accepted the watch casually. Then he opened the lid. Everything changed. The judge froze. His face lost all color. The courtroom vanished around him. For several seconds he stared at the engraving without moving. Nathan watched confusion spread across every face in the room. Even Victor Langston suddenly looked nervous. Finally, Judge Whitaker whispered a single word. Impossible. The courtroom fell silent. The judge slowly lifted his eyes toward Nathan. And for the first time since the hearing began, he looked genuinely shocked. The silence inside the courtroom seemed to stretch forever. Judge Samuel Whitaker remained seated behind the bench, staring at the silver pocket watch as though he had just seen a ghost. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even Victor Langston appeared uncertain for the first time since the hearing began. Nathan stood in the center of the room with his hands still bound, unable to understand what had caused such a dramatic reaction. The judge slowly closed the watch and examined the engraving again. Then he looked directly at Nathan. Where did you get this? Nathan frowned. It belonged to my mother. Before her? I don't know. Whitaker's expression darkened. You never asked? Nathan hesitated. I asked many times. She never answered. The judge leaned back slowly. His gaze drifted toward a distant place. Only he could see. 25 years. Vanished from his eyes. When he finally spoke again, his voice sounded different. Older somehow. Heavier. I have seen this watch before. The entire courtroom stirred. Nathan felt his pulse quicken. You have? Whitaker nodded. 25 years ago. Victor Langston rose immediately. Your Honor, with respect, what does a pocket watch have to do with the missing payroll chest? The judge ignored him. His attention remained fixed on Nathan. Tell me your mother's name, Mary Cole. Whitaker inhaled sharply. Several older townspeople exchanged confused glances. The judge lowered his eyes briefly before speaking. And your father? Nathan shook his head. I never knew him. A strange expression crossed Whitaker's face. It looked almost like regret. Before he could continue, Langston stepped forward again. Your Honor, this hearing concerns theft. The judge's gaze snapped toward him. For the first time, Nathan saw genuine authority emerge from the old jurist. Sit down, Mr. Langston. The executive froze. The courtroom grew quiet again. Slowly, Langston obeyed. Whitaker turned back toward Nathan. 25 years ago, there was another railroad investigation. The room listened carefully. At that time, the Western Frontier Railroad was expanding through 3 territories. Enormous sums of money moved through the company. Land rights changed hands. Contracts were awarded. Entire towns depended upon railroad investments. He paused. Then one of the company's senior auditors disappeared. Nathan frowned. An auditor? The judge nodded. A man named Samuel Whitaker. Confusion spread through the courtroom. Then realization followed. Nathan stared at the judge. Whitaker? The judge nodded again. My older brother. A murmur spread through the room. Victor Langston's face became noticeably paler. Nathan's attention shifted immediately. The executive looked frightened. Not surprised. Frightened. That distinction mattered. Judge Whitaker continued. Samuel spent months investigating financial irregularities inside the railroad company. Large sums of money were vanishing. Contracts were being manipulated. Land deeds disappeared. Payroll records changed. He believed someone powerful was stealing from both investors and workers. The judge looked down at the watch again. Then he vanished. The room remained completely silent. No body was ever found. No suspects were charged. The company insisted he left voluntarily. Whitaker's voice hardened. I never believed that explanation. Nathan felt something cold settle into his stomach. The watch belonged to your brother? Yes. The judge held it carefully. I gave it to him myself. The courtroom erupted. People began whispering everywhere. Sheriff Boone stared at the watch. The attorneys exchanged nervous glances. Harold Briggs looked like he might faint. Nathan stood frozen. The watch he had carried his entire life suddenly felt far heavier than silver should weigh. Judge Whitaker raised a hand. The room quieted. Mr. Cole. Yes, sir? How old are you? 26. The judge nodded slowly. Interesting. Nathan frowned. Why? Whitaker hesitated. Because Samuel disappeared 25 years ago. The implication hung in the air. Nathan felt his heartbeat accelerate. Across the room, Victor Langston stood again. This is absurd. The judge turned sharply. Explain. Langston straightened his coat. A family heirloom appearing after 25 years proves nothing. We are discussing a payroll theft, not ancient history. Perhaps. Whitaker's eyes narrowed. Then you won't object to answering a few questions. Langston's confidence faltered slightly. Question? How long have you worked for the railroad company? 17 years? And before that? Various management positions. Did you know Samuel Whitaker? For the first time, Langston hesitated. Only briefly, but long enough. No. Judge Whitaker smiled without warmth. That's unfortunate. Why? Because company records indicate you worked directly under him. Silence crashed over the room. Langston's face drained of color. Nathan immediately understood. The judge had not asked that question blindly. He already knew the answer. He was testing him. And Langston had lied. Several spectators noticed it too. Whispering returned. Harold Briggs looked increasingly terrified. Judge Whitaker leaned forward. Would you like to amend your statement? Langston swallowed visibly. It was a long time ago. So you did know him? Briefly. Whitaker nodded. Interesting. Nathan watched carefully. The hearing had changed completely. Nobody cared about the payroll chest anymore. Everyone sensed a larger story emerging beneath the surface, one that powerful people desperately wanted buried. Suddenly a voice interrupted from the back of the courtroom. I need to say something. Every head turned. Harold Briggs stood trembling near the rear benches. The railroad accountant looked exhausted. His hands shook violently. Victor Langston immediately stiffened. Harold! Briggs ignored him. He looked directly at Judge Whitaker. Your Honor, I need protection. The courtroom exploded into murmurs. Langston stepped forward. Sit down. Briggs backed away. No. Harold. No. The accountant's voice cracked. I'm done. Sheriff Boone immediately moved closer. Whitaker raised a hand. Proceed. Briggs took a deep breath. The payroll chest was never stolen. Silence. Complete silence. Nathan felt the floor disappear beneath him. Briggs continued before fear could stop him. The money was moved. Langston's face became a mask of rage. You fool. Briggs ignored him. The chest was transferred to a private railcar last night. The judge leaned forward. By whom? Briggs closed his eyes briefly. By company order. Gasps echoed throughout the courtroom. Whose order? Briggs pointed directly at Victor Langston. Chaos erupted. Workers shouted. Spectators stood. Sheriff Boone immediately moved between the executive and the witness. Nathan stared in disbelief. The railroad director remained frozen for several seconds. Then something unexpected happened. Langston smiled. It was not the smile of a trapped man. It was the smile of someone who knew a secret nobody else understood. You think this changes anything? He asked quietly. Briggs looked terrified. Whitaker narrowed his eyes. Explain. Langston slowly reached into his coat and removed a folded document. Because the payroll chest is irrelevant. The judge accepted the paper. His expression darkened immediately. Nathan watched confusion spread through the room. What is it? Whitaker looked up. An arrest warrant. Nathan blinked. For who? The judge's eyes shifted toward him. You. The room fell silent again. On what charge? Nathan asked. Whitaker lowered the document slowly. Murder. No one breathed. No one moved. Even Briggs looked shocked. Nathan felt his mind go completely blank. Murder. The word echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Judge Whitaker examined the document again. His expression grew increasingly grim. This warrant was issued 3 days ago in Fairmont County. Nathan stared. I've never even been there. Whitaker nodded slowly. According to this document, a railroad investigator named Benjamin Graves was found dead near a construction camp. Nathan felt cold spread through his chest. And they're accusing me? Yes. The judge's eyes shifted toward Langston, which raises an important question. The executive smiled faintly. What question is that? Whitaker placed the warrant beside the pocket watch. Why did the railroad company prepare a murder charge before the payroll chest disappeared? For the first time all morning, Victor Langston had no answer. For several seconds after Judge Whitaker asked his question, nobody in the courtroom moved. The accusation of murder hung over the room like smoke after a gunshot. Nathan Cole stood frozen in the center of the courtroom, struggling to understand how his life had unraveled so completely in less than 48 hours. Yesterday he had been laying railroad track. Today he stood accused of theft, linked to a 25-year-old disappearance, and now faced a murder charge connected to a man he had never met. Yet somehow the most unsettled person in the room was not Nathan. It was Victor Langston. The railroad executive sat rigidly in his chair, his jaw clenched so tightly that the muscles in his neck visibly strained. Judge Whitaker continued watching him. Well, Mr. Langston? The executive remained silent. Why was a murder warrant prepared before the payroll chest vanished? Still no answer. The judge leaned forward. That's what I thought. Harold Briggs swallowed nervously. The accountant looked as though years of fear were finally catching up to him. Nathan noticed something else. Briggs kept glancing toward the courthouse windows, not toward Langston, not toward the judge, toward the windows, as though he expected someone to appear outside at any moment. The realization sent a chill through Nathan. Whatever secret Briggs knew, it frightened him more than prison. Judge Whitaker finally turned toward Sheriff Boone. I want the witness placed under protection. Boone nodded immediately. 2 deputies moved toward Briggs. The accountant looked relieved. The feeling lasted less than 5 seconds. A gunshot exploded outside the courthouse. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Glass shattered. People screamed. Several spectators threw themselves to the floor. Briggs staggered backward as a bullet punched through the window and embedded itself in the wall inches from his head. Sheriff Boone drew his revolver instantly. Down! Another shot rang out. Then another. The courthouse transformed into confusion. Nathan instinctively dropped behind a wooden railing. Judge Whitaker ducked behind the bench. Deputies rushed toward the windows. Outside, horses thundered through the street. The attack lasted less than 30 seconds. Then the gunfire stopped. Silence followed. Boone cautiously approached the shattered window and looked outside. They're gone. The courtroom slowly recovered. People stood. Others helped the injured. Miraculously, no one had been hit. Yet the message was clear. Someone wanted Harold Briggs dead. Judge Whitaker rose first. His face looked colder than Nathan had ever seen. Court is adjourned. Nobody argued. Within minutes, deputies secured the building and escorted witnesses to safety. Nathan expected to be returned directly to jail. Instead, Sheriff Boone led him into a private office near the rear of the courthouse. Judge Whitaker followed. The door closed behind them. Nathan remained standing. Boone folded his arms. Whitaker placed the pocket watch carefully upon the desk between them. For several moments, nobody spoke. Finally, the judge broke the silence. Mr. Cole. Yes, sir? I no longer believe you're involved in either theft or murder. Nathan exhaled slowly. That's good to hear. However. Nathan immediately tensed again. However what? Whitaker studied him carefully. I believe someone wants you imprisoned before certain questions can be asked. Nathan nodded. He had reached the same conclusion hours ago. Boone pulled a chair closer. The question is why? Nathan looked at the watch. Because of that? The judge followed his gaze. Possibly. He opened the watch once more. Or because of who owned it. Nathan sat down slowly. You really think your brother's disappearance is connected to this? Whitaker's expression darkened. I know it is. The certainty in his voice surprised both Nathan and Boone. The judge reached into his coat and removed an old leather notebook. The pages looked decades old. I stopped investigating publicly years ago. He opened the notebook carefully. But I never stopped investigating privately. Nathan leaned forward. Inside were names, dates, financial records, maps, railroad contracts, dozens of pages filled with notes. Whitaker pointed to one particular entry. Samuel vanished while examining land acquisitions connected to the Northern Expansion Project. Nathan frowned. The same expansion currently being built? Yes. Sheriff Boone blinked. That's impossible. Not impossible. Whitaker tapped the page. Convenient. Nathan stared at the records. You think the same people are involved? The judge nodded slowly. Or their successors. Boone looked skeptical. 25 years is a long time, not for money. The judge closed the notebook. And not for secrets. A knock interrupted them. One of the deputies entered looking pale. Sheriff. Boone stood. What is it? We found something. The deputy swallowed. Near the train yard. Minutes later, all 4 men stood beside the railroad station under a gray winter sky. Snow continued falling lightly across Cedar Hollow. Several workers had gathered nearby. Nathan immediately sensed something was wrong. The atmosphere felt heavy, unnatural. A tarp covered a shape lying beside a freight wagon. Sheriff Boone removed the tarp. Nathan froze. The dead man lying beneath it was Benjamin Graves, or at least he assumed it was. The body carried an identification card bearing that name. According to the warrant, Graves was the railroad investigator Nathan, supposedly murdered 3 days earlier. Yet there was a problem. A very large problem. The corpse was fresh. Too fresh. Judge Whitaker noticed it immediately. Good God. Boone nodded grimly. He hasn't been dead 3 days. Nathan stared. How long? The sheriff knelt beside the body. Less than 12 hours. Silence followed. The implications were staggering. The murder warrant claimed Benjamin Graves died days earlier in another county. Yet his body had just appeared in Cedar Hollow overnight, which meant the warrant was false. Completely false. Judge Whitaker stood slowly. Someone forged the charge. Nathan felt anger replacing confusion. To arrest me. Yes. Boone looked toward the rail yard. And to stop Graves from talking. The judge examined the corpse more closely. A small notebook protruded from the investigator's coat pocket. Boone carefully removed it. Most pages were soaked by melted snow. Several remained readable. He flipped through them, then stopped abruptly. Judge. Whitaker looked over. Boone handed him the notebook. Nathan watched the judge's face change. What is it? Whitaker turned one page toward him. The entry contained a list of names. Most meant nothing to Nathan. One did. Victor Langston. Another did. Harold Briggs. Then Nathan noticed a third name written repeatedly throughout the notebook. Samuel Whitaker. The dead investigator had been researching the exact same disappearance 25 years later. Judge Whitaker closed the notebook slowly. This wasn't a theft investigation. Boone nodded. No. Nathan looked from one man to the other. Then what was Graves investigating? Neither answered immediately. Finally, Whitaker spoke. A murder. Nathan frowned. His own? The judge's eyes hardened. No. He looked toward the distant rail line stretching across the snowy horizon. My brother's. The wind howled across the tracks. Somewhere in the distance, a locomotive whistle echoed through the valley. For the first time, Nathan realized the conspiracy surrounding Samuel Whitaker had never ended. It had merely waited. And now, 25 years later, someone was willing to kill again to keep the truth buried beneath the railroad. The discovery of Benjamin Graves's body transformed Cedar Hollow overnight. By sunrise, every conversation in town revolved around the same question. If Nathan Cole had supposedly murdered Graves 3 days earlier in another county, why had the investigator's body appeared beside the railroad tracks only hours ago? The contradiction was impossible to ignore. Even the people who initially believed Nathan might be guilty now struggled to explain the facts. Someone had forged the murder charge. Someone had transported the body. And someone had been willing to kill in order to keep a secret hidden. The question was who? Judge Whitaker spent most of the night reviewing the notebook recovered from Graves's coat. Nathan remained under protective custody rather than imprisonment, a distinction that did little to improve his mood. He occupied a small room above the sheriff's office while deputies guarded the stairwell below. Technically, he was still under investigation. Practically speaking, everyone knew he was being protected from whoever had murdered Graves. Nathan slept little. The notebook haunted him. More specifically, one page haunted him. Among the lists of railroad contracts, land deeds, and financial transactions, Graves had written a single sentence and circled it 3 times. Find the boy before they do. Nathan had no idea who the investigator meant, yet deep inside he suspected the answer. Morning arrived beneath a gray sky. Snow continued falling steadily across Cedar Hollow. Shortly after sunrise, Sheriff Boone entered the room carrying coffee and several folded documents. Nathan sat beside the window watching workers clear snow from the main street. Any news? Boone handed him a cup. Depends. On what? Whether you consider multiple murders good news. Nathan sighed. Fair point. The sheriff sat down heavily. He looked exhausted. The coroner finished examining Graves. Nathan waited. Boone rubbed his eyes. He wasn't killed where we found him. I assumed that. The body had been moved. Nathan nodded. Anything else? Boone hesitated. Yes. His expression darkened. Graves wasn't the first. Nathan stared. What do you mean? Boone removed a folded report from his pocket. 3 railroad investigators disappeared over the past 7 years. Silence filled the room. Nathan slowly lowered his coffee cup. 3? Officially, they resigned. Boone snorted. Unofficially, nobody knows. Nathan felt his stomach tighten. And Graves was investigating Samuel Whitaker? Among other things. The sheriff handed him the report. Nathan scanned the names. Every investigator had examined railroad finances shortly before vanishing. Every investigation involved land acquisitions connected to the Northern Expansion Project. Every trail eventually led toward the same collection of executives and investors. The pattern was impossible to miss. Someone had been eliminating investigators for years. A knock interrupted them. Deputy Carson entered. Judge Whitaker wants everyone at the courthouse. Boone stood immediately. Why? He says he found something. 20 minutes later, Nathan entered the courthouse under armed escort. The atmosphere felt entirely different from the previous day. Deputies guarded every entrance. Witnesses were searched before entering. Even the judge's chambers had posted guards. Fear now lived openly inside Cedar Hollow. Nathan found Judge Whitaker standing beside a large table covered with maps and documents. Harold Briggs sat nearby looking terrified. Several federal representatives had arrived overnight. Their presence alone indicated how serious the situation had become. Whitaker motioned Nathan closer. Take a look. Nathan stepped forward. Spread across the table lay railroad maps dating back 25 years. Lines crisscrossed multiple territories. Freight routes connected dozens of towns. Most seemed ordinary. Then Whitaker pointed toward a particular section. Mercer Valley. Nathan frowned. What's important about it? Nothing. That doesn't sound important. Exactly. Whitaker tapped the map. The railroad spent more money building this branch than any other route in the territory. Nathan studied the line. It ended in an empty region. No town. No mines. No major settlements. Nothing. Why build it? Boone asked. That's the question. Harold Briggs finally spoke. His voice sounded weak, because the railroad wasn't transporting freight. Everyone turned toward him. Briggs swallowed hard, at least not originally. Judge Whitaker nodded. Go on. The accountant hesitated before continuing. The branch existed before the official expansion. It was hidden inside company records under multiple project names. Nathan frowned. Hidden why? Briggs looked miserable. Because freight wasn't the purpose. Silence settled over the room. Then what was? Boone asked. Briggs stared at the table. Money. Nathan blinked. Money? And land deeds. Briggs pointed toward Mercer Valley. For 25 years, company executives transferred assets through that route. Whitaker folded his arms. Explain. Briggs took a deep breath. Imagine stealing $1. People notice. Steal $1 million through 50 companies over 20 years and nobody sees anything. Nathan immediately understood. The railroad had created a system. A network. A mechanism for moving wealth invisibly. Land rights. Investments. Payroll funds. Government contracts. Everything flowed through Mercer Valley. Everything disappeared into hidden accounts. Everything became impossible to trace. Judge Whitaker looked grim. Samuel discovered it. Briggs nodded. Yes. Nathan felt cold spread through his chest. And that's why he vanished. Nobody answered. They didn't need to. Suddenly, another realization struck him. Wait. Everyone looked at him. Nathan pointed toward the maps. If Samuel discovered the system 25 years ago, Whitaker nodded slowly, then someone had to replace him. Nathan finished the thought. Someone inside the company kept protecting it. Boone frowned. You think the conspiracy survived multiple generations of management? Briggs laughed bitterly. Not management. Then who? The accountant pointed toward a list of investors attached to one of the maps. Most names meant nothing to Nathan. One did. The room went silent as everyone read it. Jonathan Langston. Nathan looked toward Victor Langston's name on another document, then back toward the older name. Understanding hit immediately. His father, Briggs nodded. Victor inherited more than his position. Judge Whitaker slowly sat down. Good Lord, the conspiracy was older than anyone realized. Samuel Whitaker had uncovered it 25 years earlier. Jonathan Langston had protected it then. Now Victor Langston protected it in the present. Generations of corruption. Generations of theft. Generations of murder. The room remained silent until Deputy Carson burst through the doors. His face had gone completely pale. Sheriff! Boone stood instantly. What happened? Carson struggled to catch his breath. The witness. Every person in the room froze. Harold Briggs immediately turned white. What witness? Boone demanded. Carson swallowed. The railroad worker from Fairmont. Judge Whitaker's expression hardened. The one who saw Graves before he died? Yes. Silence filled the room. Carson finally spoke the words nobody wanted to hear. He's dead. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Outside, snow continued falling over Cedar Hollow. Inside, the reality became impossible to ignore. Whoever stood behind the conspiracy wasn't merely covering tracks anymore. They were actively hunting witnesses, one by one, and judging by the fear in Harold Briggs's eyes, everyone understood something terrible. He knew he was next. Harold Briggs did not say a word after Deputy Carson announced that the Fairmont Railroad worker was dead. He simply stared at the courthouse floor, while the color drained from his face, as though he had been waiting for that sentence all night and still found himself unprepared when it arrived. Nathan Cole watched him carefully. The accountant's fear was no longer nervousness. It had become certainty. The kind of certainty a man feels when he hears footsteps coming down a hallway and knows the door at the end is his own. Judge Whitaker closed Benjamin Graves's notebook and placed both hands on the table. Who was the dead worker? Deputy Carson swallowed. Name was Thomas Bell, switchman at the Fairmont construction camp. Sheriff Boone's expression hardened. Cause? They say he fell between cars. Boone muttered something under his breath. Convenient. Whitaker's eyes moved to Briggs. Mr. Briggs, the accountant flinched. Yes? Did Thomas Bell know something? Briggs opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Nathan stepped closer. He's already dead. Staying quiet won't save him. Briggs looked at Nathan, then toward the windows, then back at the judge. He saw Graves meet someone before he disappeared. Who? Whitaker asked. Briggs shut his eyes. Victor Langston. Silence tightened around the room. Sheriff Boone immediately turned toward the door. "Where is Langston now?" Carson answered quickly. "He left town an hour ago." "Left?" "Company men said he was returning to the rail yard." Boone's jaw clenched. Of course he was. Judge Whitaker began gathering papers. "We go there now." Briggs suddenly stood. "No, the rail yard isn't just an office. It's where they move things. Papers. Money. People. Bodies." Nathan felt the words strike him. Bodies? Briggs looked at him helplessly. Graves wasn't brought to Cedar Hollow by wagon. He came in a freight car. The room went cold. Whitaker spoke quietly. "Which freight car?" Briggs shook his head. "I don't know." Boone stepped closer. "Think carefully." "I don't know!" Briggs snapped, panic finally cracking through his voice. "The cars are renumbered. Routes are changed. Manifests are altered after departure. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked." Judge Whitaker studied him with growing intensity. "How long have you known?" Briggs looked ashamed. "Long enough." "How long?" 5 years. Nathan's anger rose sharply. 5 years and you said nothing?" Briggs turned on him, tears bright in his eyes. "Do you think I wanted this? I was a clerk when I found the first false ledger. I thought it was stolen supplies. Then a man disappeared. Then another. Then I received a note telling me my wife would not survive childbirth if I misplaced another document. She died anyway." The room went quiet. Briggs sank back into his chair. After that, fear became easier than courage. Nathan wanted to hate him. Part of him still did. But another part recognized the ruined shape of a man who had been crushed slowly instead of broken all at once. Judge Whitaker's voice softened only slightly. "Fear may explain silence. It does not excuse it. But if you speak now, lives may still be saved." Briggs nodded weakly. "There's a private dispatch office behind the northern freight shed. Langston keeps duplicate route orders there. Not the public manifests. The real ones." Boone grabbed his hat. "Then we move." They left the courthouse under heavy guard. Snow fell thicker now, turning Cedar Hollow's streets white and muffling the noise of panic that had spread through town. Nathan walked between 2 deputies, still technically under custody but no longer treated as a prisoner. Men from the railroad watched from porches and alleys. Some lowered their eyes when Nathan passed. Others looked toward the rail yard with the uneasy expression of workers who had spent years suspecting wrong and fearing confirmation. At the edge of the station, the Western Frontier Railroad yard stretched across several acres of track, coal piles, water towers, freight sheds, and idle cars half buried beneath snow. Steam hissed from an engine near the roundhouse. Telegraph wires hummed faintly overhead. Victor Langston's private carriage stood beside the company office, but the man himself was nowhere in sight. Boone motioned deputies outward. "Search the sheds. Nobody leaves." Judge Whitaker turned to Nathan. "Stay close." Nathan almost laughed. "That's new. So is being hunted for a watch." They moved toward the northern freight shed, with Briggs leading reluctantly. Every step seemed to make him smaller. He pointed to a narrow door hidden behind stacked lumber. Boone forced it open with his shoulder. Inside was a cramped dispatch room lined with shelves, telegraph slips, sealed route orders, maps, and locked cabinets. A coal stove burned low in the corner, though no one appeared to be inside. Briggs stared at the stove and went pale. "No." He rushed forward and threw open the stove door. Flames licked around curled papers already turning black. "They're burning them!" Boone cursed and grabbed a poker, dragging half-burned sheets onto the floor. Nathan stamped out sparks while Whitaker snatched up readable fragments. Route numbers, car transfers, names, dates. Some pages were already lost, but not all. Briggs ripped open a cabinet and began pulling ledgers free with desperate speed. These are duplicates. Boone seized a stack. Can they prove movement of Graves's body? Maybe. Briggs grabbed another folder. Then he froze. His eyes locked on a page tucked behind a ledger spine. Slowly, he pulled it free. "Judge." Whitaker took it. Nathan saw the old man's face change. "What is it?" The judge did not answer immediately. He unfolded the paper fully. It was a private freight order dated 25 years earlier. Destination: Mercer Valley Branch. Cargo category: sealed company property. Authorized by Jonathan Langston. Special handling: no public manifest. At the bottom, handwritten in faded ink, was a note: SW, removed from audit custody at midnight. Nathan looked at the initials. S.W. Whitaker's jaw tightened. Samuel Whitaker. The room fell completely still. For 25 years, the judge had searched for proof that his brother had not simply vanished. Now it lay in his hand, half covered in coal ash. Boone spoke carefully. Removed where? Whitaker scanned the page. Car 47. Briggs inhaled sharply. Car 47? Nathan turned to him. What? Briggs looked toward the yard through the frosted window. That's impossible. Why? Boone demanded. Briggs swallowed. Because car 47 is still here. Everyone turned toward the window. Across the rail yard, beyond a line of newer freight cars, sat an old boxcar almost swallowed by snow and weeds near an unused spur. Its paint had peeled away. Its wheels were rusted. A chain crossed its door. Nathan had passed it 100 times without noticing it. Now every eye in the room fixed on it as if the dead themselves had begun knocking from inside. Judge Whitaker folded the order slowly. Open it. Boone nodded to his deputies. They crossed the yard together through blowing snow. Railroad workers gathered at a distance. Word spread faster than the wind. The old boxcar seemed to grow larger as they approached. Nathan felt the pocket watch ticking against his chest. Each tick sounded louder than the last. Boone examined the chain. New lock, Briggs whispered. Someone has been inside recently. How can you tell? Nathan asked. Briggs pointed to the snow near the wheels. Boot tracks. Fresh ones, partly covered but unmistakable. Boone raised a crowbar and broke the lock with 2 hard strikes. The chain fell into the snow. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Boone and Nathan pulled the door open. The smell came first: dust, old wood, oil, and something else beneath it, old enough to have faded but terrible enough to remain. Judge Whitaker stepped forward with a lantern. Inside the car were crates, ledgers, sealed trunks, broken office furniture, and a tarp-covered shape near the far wall. Nobody spoke. The judge climbed inside before anyone could stop him. Nathan followed. The old floorboards creaked beneath their boots. Whitaker moved toward the tarp with a steadiness that looked like courage, only because grief had not yet reached his hands. He pulled it back. Beneath lay a skeleton in the remains of a dark suit, a rusted chain still around one ankle. Beside the body sat a leather satchel, cracked with age. Judge Whitaker made a sound Nathan never forgot. Not a cry, not a gasp. Something smaller, something worse. He knelt beside the remains and touched the torn collar of the suit. Samuel. Snow blew through the open door behind them. The rail yard outside had gone silent. Even the locomotive seemed to hush. Nathan stood frozen, feeling like an intruder at a grave. The judge's brother had not run. He had not abandoned his family. He had been locked inside a company freight car and left to die within sight of the town his killers helped build. Boone removed his hat. Briggs covered his mouth. Nathan looked at the satchel. Judge. Whitaker did not move. Nathan crouched and carefully opened the old leather bag. Inside were papers wrapped in oilcloth, remarkably preserved. Audit records, land transfers, names of investors, payments routed through Mercer Valley. And on top, a folded letter addressed to Samuel's younger brother. Whitaker took it with shaking hands. He opened it slowly. The first line nearly broke him. Samuel had written, "If you find this, then truth survived longer than I did." Nathan's hand moved to the pocket watch. The engraving suddenly made sense. It had not been sentimental. It had been a warning, a promise, a map across time. Then something clattered outside the boxcar. Boone spun toward the door. A deputy shouted from the yard, "Riders!" Gunfire erupted before anyone could react. Bullets slammed into the side of car 47, tearing through old wood. Workers scattered. Deputies returned fire. Nathan grabbed Judge Whitaker and pulled him down behind a stack of crates, just as another bullet shattered the lantern. Darkness swallowed the boxcar. Outside, Victor Langston's voice cut through the storm. "Burn the car." Nathan looked toward the oilcloth records, Samuel Whitaker's bones, and the judge crouched beside 25 years of grief. The conspiracy had finally been found. Now, the men who built it intended to turn the truth into ash. "Burn the car!" Victor Langston's voice cut through the snowstorm like an execution order. Inside car 47, darkness swallowed Nathan Cole, Judge Samuel Whitaker, Sheriff Boone, Harold Briggs, and the remains of the man whose disappearance had haunted the judge for 25 years. Bullets punched through the old wooden walls, sending splinters across crates and ledgers. Nathan dragged the judge behind a stack of sealed trunks while Boone returned fire through the half-open door. Outside, deputies shouted, workers scattered, horses screamed, and somewhere beyond the gunfire someone struck a match. Nathan smelled kerosene before he saw the glow. "They're really going to burn it," Briggs whispered, voice breaking. Judge Whitaker clutched his brother's letter against his chest, his face pale in the little light leaking through bullet holes. "Not while Samuel is still inside." Boone fired twice, then ducked as return shots ripped through the doorway. "We can't hold from here. Too many angles." Nathan looked around desperately. The shattered lantern had gone out, but snowlight entered through cracks in the roof. Around them were audit records, route orders, railroad trunks, 25 years of evidence, and Samuel Whitaker's bones chained to the far wall. He had been found at last, only to be threatened with fire. The thought filled Nathan with a rage so fierce it cut through fear. There has to be another way out. Briggs pointed shakily toward the rear wall. "Old maintenance hatch. Some boxcars had them for brake access." Boone snapped, "Where?" "Under the rear crate stack." Flames licked up outside the car's left side. Smoke seeped through the boards. Nathan and Boone crawled toward the rear, dragging crates aside while bullets continued slamming into the car. Judge Whitaker gathered Samuel's papers with trembling hands. Briggs tried to help, but panic made him clumsy. Nathan grabbed his shoulder. "Harold, look at me." The accountant's eyes were wild. "We're going to die in here. Not if your fear starts working instead of talking." Briggs blinked, shocked into silence. Nathan shoved a stack of ledgers into his arms. "Carry those." The man nodded. Outside, Langston shouted to his men, "No one leaves that car with documents." Boone found the hatch beneath a layer of dust and rotten boards. The iron latch was rusted nearly solid. He pulled once. Nothing. Twice. Nothing. Smoke thickened. Heat crawled along the wall. Nathan seized a crowbar from near the crates and jammed it under the hatch edge. Boone joined him. Together they forced it upward with a shriek of old metal. Cold air rushed in from beneath the boxcar. Snow swirled through the opening. "Go!" Boone ordered. Briggs crawled first, clutching ledgers to his chest. Nathan turned toward the judge. "Your Honor!" But Whitaker had moved back to the skeleton. He was kneeling beside Samuel's remains, trying to release the rusted chain from the ankle. Nathan rushed to him. "We have to leave." The judge did not look up. "I will not abandon him. You won't help him by dying beside him. For 25 years I let them call him a coward." The judge's voice broke. "I let the world believe he ran." Nathan grabbed the chain and pulled. It did not move. Flames roared against the outside wall. Boone shouted from the hatch, "Now!" Nathan looked around, spotted a spike hammer near a crate, and swung it down against the rusted shackle. Once, twice, 3 times. The metal cracked. The judge stared at him. Nathan swung again. The shackle broke loose. Whitaker gathered his brother's remains as carefully as he could, wrapping the bones and torn clothing in the tarp. It was not dignified, not enough, but it was a rescue of a kind. Nathan shoved Samuel's leather satchel across his shoulder and guided the judge toward the hatch. Boone climbed down last after firing one final shot to keep Langston's men back. They dropped into snow beneath the car, crawling between rusted wheels while flames spread above them. The underside of car 47 glowed orange. Smoke poured through gaps in the boards. They emerged on the far side of the boxcar near a drainage ditch partially hidden by snowdrifts. A deputy spotted them and waved wildly. "This way!" Gunfire followed immediately. Langston's men realized too late that the prisoners had escaped beneath the car. Nathan pulled Whitaker down into the ditch while Boone covered them. Briggs stumbled and nearly dropped the ledgers. A bullet struck the snow inches from his hand. He screamed, but kept crawling. Nathan looked back and saw Victor Langston standing near the burning car, pistol in hand, face twisted with fury. Their eyes met through smoke and snowfall. Langston aimed directly at him. Before he could fire, a group of railroad workers charged from behind the coal shed, swinging shovels, hammers, and lengths of chain. Men who had spent years fearing executives suddenly realized the company had planned to burn evidence and bodies in front of them. Fear cracked and anger stepped through. Langston's hired gunmen turned to meet the workers, and the shot meant for Nathan went wide. Sheriff Boone seized the moment. "To the roundhouse!" They ran through the rail yard with smoke behind them and snow ahead. Judge Whitaker carried his brother's remains as though carrying a child. Nathan carried the satchel. Briggs carried the ledgers. Boone and 2 deputies dragged them into the roundhouse, where a half-repaired locomotive sat cold on the center track. Railroad workers slammed the doors shut and barred them with iron rods. Outside, gunfire faded into shouting as the workers forced Langston's men back toward the freight office. Inside the roundhouse, everyone stood gasping in the dim light. The smell of coal, grease, and smoke filled the air. Judge Whitaker sank onto a crate, still holding the tarp. For the first time since finding Samuel, he allowed his head to bow. Nathan stood beside him, unsure what to say. There were no words large enough for 25 years of grief. Boone checked the documents quickly. "We saved enough?" Briggs looked at the ledgers, then at the satchel. His face changed slowly from fear to grim certainty. "More than enough." Nathan opened Samuel's satchel and removed the oilcloth bundle. The top page bore a title written in precise handwriting, Mercer Valley Trust Routing Scheme. Beneath it were names, payments, forged deeds, shell companies, and transfer routes. At the bottom of one page was Jonathan Langston's signature. On another, a younger Victor Langston appeared as witness. Boone whistled softly. He was involved even then. Briggs nodded. Victor wasn't just protecting his father's crimes. He helped learn the system. Judge Whitaker lifted his head. His eyes were wet but burning. "Then we bring this to court." Boone shook his head. "Courthouse isn't safe. They'll attack again." A railroad foreman named Eli Mercer stepped forward. "Then hold court here." Everyone turned. The foreman, a broad man with gray in his beard, removed his cap. "This roundhouse belongs to the men tonight. Company can't burn it without burning the whole yard. Workers are outside. Townspeople are gathering. Put the judge on that crate and read the truth." Boone stared at him. "You'd stand against Langston?" Mercer looked toward the burning glow outside. "He tried to burn a dead man twice." "Yes." A murmur of agreement spread through the workers. Nathan felt something shift in the room. The investigation had started as a private matter. One accused worker, one judge's brother, one missing watch. But now the conspiracy belonged to everyone whose wages had vanished, whose land had been stolen, whose fear had been purchased with company money. Judge Whitaker stood slowly. He placed Samuel's remains on a clean canvas beside the locomotive, then straightened his coat. "Sheriff, summon every citizen willing to hear sworn testimony." Boone nodded. "And Langston? Bring him alive if possible." The sheriff checked his revolver. "And if not?" The judge looked toward the documents in Nathan's hands. "Then bring enough witnesses that no man can claim confusion." For the next hour, Cedar Hollow transformed. Men rang the station bell, not for arrivals, but for justice. Townspeople poured toward the rail yard carrying lanterns. Workers dragged benches into the roundhouse. Women brought blankets for the wounded. Deputies arrested 2 of Langston's hired gunmen after railroad workers trapped them near the coal shed. The burning car 47 collapsed into itself, but not before Samuel Whitaker's remains and records had escaped. Victor Langston disappeared into the company office with 3 loyal guards. Nobody knew whether he was preparing defense, escape, or another attack. Inside the roundhouse, Judge Whitaker opened an emergency hearing under territorial authority. Nathan stood near the front, no longer in handcuffs. Harold Briggs testified first. His voice shook, but it did not fail. He described false ledgers, private freight routes, payroll transfers, forged land acquisitions, and the movement of bodies through unlisted cars. Several times, he stopped to breathe. Several times he looked ready to collapse. But each time he looked toward Nathan, toward Samuel's remains, toward the workers filling the roundhouse, and continued. When he finished, the room was silent with horror. Then Judge Whitaker read Samuel's letter aloud. "If you find this, then truth survived longer than I did." The words echoed against iron walls and locomotive steel. Workers removed their hats. Some wept quietly. Nathan felt the pocket watch ticking against his chest and understood that the object had not merely survived. It had waited for the right moment to force the living to listen. The hearing continued until near midnight. Evidence piled higher. Names were entered into record. Jonathan Langston's network became visible piece by piece. Victor Langston's role became undeniable. Finally, Sheriff Boone returned from the company office, face grim. "Langston's gone." Anger surged through the roundhouse. Judge Whitaker's expression hardened. "Where?" Boone placed a torn rail schedule on the crate. "Private locomotive." "South Spur." Nathan stepped forward. "Mercer Valley." Briggs looked up sharply. "That's where the old vault is." "Vault?" Whitaker asked. The accountant swallowed. "The final records. The money. The deeds. If he reaches it before us, he'll destroy what's left." Nathan looked toward the snow-dark tracks beyond the roundhouse doors. "Then we follow." Boone shook his head. "We don't have an engine ready." A voice came from behind them. Eli Mercer, the foreman, looked toward the half-repaired locomotive in the center of the roundhouse. "You do if my men get 10 minutes." Nathan looked at the engine, then at the judge, then at the pocket watch in his hand. The minute hand had just reached midnight. For 25 years, Samuel Whitaker's truth had waited in a dead rail car. Now the living had to chase the man who tried to bury it. Judge Whitaker closed his brother's letter and nodded once. "Fire the engine. Fire the engine." Judge Whitaker's command struck the roundhouse like a bell. For one breath, every man in the room simply stared at the half-repaired locomotive sitting cold on the center track, its black iron body dusted with ash and snowmelt, its boiler open, its wheels still chained, its firebox empty. Then Eli Mercer clapped his hands once and roared, "You heard the judge. Coal, water, tools now." The railroad workers moved as one body. Men who had been exhausted from a full day's labor suddenly found strength in fury. 2 rushed to the coal bin. 3 climbed over the engine with oil cans and wrenches. Another broke the wheel chain with a spike hammer. Someone opened the roundhouse doors, and cold night air rushed in, carrying smoke from the ruins of Car 47 and the distant whistle of Langston's private locomotive. Nathan Cole stood beside the engine with Samuel Whitaker's leather satchel across his shoulder and the silver pocket watch in his hand. The minute hand had passed midnight. Each tick felt like a small command. Move, move, move. Judge Whitaker stood near Samuel's wrapped remains, torn between pursuit and grief. Nathan saw it and stepped closer. "Your Honor." The judge looked at him. "We don't have much time." Whitaker nodded, but his eyes drifted back to the canvas bundle. "I know. We'll bring him home after." The judge swallowed. "He has waited 25 years. Nathan's voice softened. "Then he can wait one more night while we finish what he started." Whitaker stared at him for a long moment, then nodded again, this time with purpose. "You're right." Sheriff Boone entered from outside, revolver in hand, hat rim white with snow. "Langston's engine left 10 minutes ago on the South Spur. If he's headed to Mercer Valley, he has maybe 15 miles on us." Eli Mercer shouted from the locomotive, "Then we'll catch him before dawn if this old girl remembers how to run." Briggs, clutching the saved ledgers, looked horrified. "This engine hasn't run in months." Mercer grinned without humor. "Neither has justice in this town, but here we are." Workers laughed briefly, more from nerves than amusement. The firebox opened, coal hit iron. A match flared. The first flames rose, weak and orange, then stronger as bellows fed them air. Steam did not come quickly. It never did. Pressure had to build the old way, through heat, patience, and men willing to sweat in the cold. Nathan helped carry water buckets until his shoulders burned. Whitaker reviewed the evidence bundle with Briggs, while Boone organized a small armed party. 2 deputies, Eli Mercer, Nathan, the judge, and Briggs, who protested so violently that everyone agreed he must come because he clearly knew too much to leave unguarded. Outside the roundhouse, townspeople continued gathering. Some had brought lanterns. Others carried rifles. Workers stood watch along the yard. The burning remains of car 47 glowed like a funeral pyre behind them. Samuel Whitaker's remains had been placed carefully in the station office under guard, no longer hidden, no longer abandoned. When the locomotive finally hissed and shook, a cheer rose from the roundhouse. Mercer climbed into the cab. Boiler pressure's ugly, brakes are worse, and the left injector sounds like a dying mule. Boone stared. Is that good? It's enough. Nathan climbed aboard behind him, followed by Whitaker, Boone, Briggs, and the deputies. The locomotive lurched forward with a scream of metal, rolling out of the roundhouse into the snowy rail yard. The town watched as if seeing something larger than a machine awaken. Nathan looked back at Cedar Hollow, shrinking behind them, lanterns glowing in the storm, workers standing beside the blackened shell of car 47. He had been arrested as a thief less than 2 days earlier. Now he rode after the man who framed him, carrying evidence of a crime older than his own life. The engine gained speed slowly, then faster as it reached open track. Snow blew sideways across the cab. Sparks shot from the smokestack into the night. Mercer leaned into the controls, reading the rails by instinct. South spurs rough, he shouted over the engine. If Langston's running hard, he'll either reach Mercer Valley or wreck before it. Briggs gripped a railing with white knuckles. He won't wreck. His engineer knows the route. Nathan turned. You've been there? Briggs hesitated. Once. Whitaker's eyes sharpened. Tell us about the vault. The accountant swallowed hard. It's built into the old transfer station at the end of the Mercer Valley branch. Officially, the station closed years ago. Unofficially, it stores original deeds, offshore drafts, private investor ledgers, and sealed cash reserves. Boone frowned. Why not keep all that in a bank? Briggs laughed weakly. Because banks report deposits. Railroads move sealed cargo. Whitaker leaned closer. Will Langston destroy it? If he believes the records in car 47 survived, yes. Can he? Yes. How? Briggs looked out at the snow-dark tracks. Kerosene, powder. Or he transfers the most valuable papers to another line before sunrise. There is a junction beyond Mercer Valley. If he reaches it, he can disappear into the southern network. Nathan checked the watch again. How long? Mercer answered before Briggs could. If track holds, we reach Mercer Valley in an hour. Boone looked ahead. And Langston? Mercer narrowed his eyes at the rails. Maybe less. The chase became a battle against iron and time. The locomotive thundered through frozen timberland, past abandoned water towers, across trestles slick with ice, and through valleys where snow reflected moonlight in ghostly blue. Twice the engine slipped on grades. Once, a branch struck the cab and nearly knocked a deputy from the side. Briggs vomited over the rail and then insisted he was fine, though nobody asked. Nathan stood near the front, eyes fixed ahead, the pocket watch in his palm. The engraving inside the lid seemed to glow whenever firelight hit it. To my brother, Samuel, may truth survive longer than we do. He thought of his mother, Mary Cole, refusing to answer questions. He thought of the judge's expression when he saw the watch. He thought of Samuel's body chained inside car 47. Then another thought surfaced, one he had been avoiding since the courtroom. Samuel disappeared 25 years ago, as she peated. As she pesco. As she pissin' Samuel disappeared 25 years ago. Nathan was 26. The timeline did not prove anything. But it circled him like a wolf. She never said how. She never named his father. Whitaker had asked his age in a tone that felt like fear. Nathan looked toward the judge, who stood braced against the cab wall, face carved by firelight and grief. Your Honor. Whitaker turned. Nathan held up the watch. Did your brother know my mother? The question cut through the engine noise. Briggs looked away immediately, which told Nathan something before anyone answered. Whitaker's face tightened. I don't know. That's not true. The judge closed his eyes briefly. Boone glanced between them but said nothing. Whitaker finally opened them. I believe he did. Nathan's throat tightened. How? Mary Cole worked as a clerk at the old Cedar Hollow land office. Nathan had never known that. His mother had said she worked laundry, kitchens, boarding houses, anything that paid. When? 26 years ago. The answer struck exactly where Nathan feared it would. Whitaker continued carefully. Samuel interviewed her during his audit. She handled deed filings related to Mercer Valley. Nathan felt the cab tilt, though he knew it had not. And after he disappeared, she vanished from town for several months. Nathan gripped the watch chain so hard it dug into his palm. You think he was my father? The judge did not answer. He did not need to. The engine screamed into a curve. Snow lashed the cab. Nathan stared ahead, unable to breathe properly. His whole life had rested on absence. No father, no explanation, no family beyond a dead mother and a watch. Now the absence had a name: Samuel Whitaker, murdered auditor, brother of the judge. Man chained in a boxcar while his son grew up laying tracks for the company that killed him. Anger and grief rose together so violently Nathan nearly staggered. Whitaker reached toward him, then stopped. Nathan, did you know? No. Did you suspect? The judge looked pained. Only when I saw the watch. Nathan laughed once, bitterly. So did everyone else get to know my life before I did? Whitaker flinched. The words were unfair, perhaps, but Nathan did not care. He turned away, staring into the snow. Boone spoke quietly. Lights ahead. Everyone looked forward. Far down the track, through drifting snow, a faint red glow moved against the darkness. Langston's private locomotive. Mercer grinned. We've got him. Then the grin disappeared. No, wait. The red glow split into two lights. One moving forward. One stationary. Mercer cursed. Switch signal. Briggs went pale. He changed the junction. Boone shouted. Meaning? Mercer yanked the whistle cord. The locomotive screamed. Meaning, if we stay on this track, we're not going to Mercer Valley. Nathan leaned out and saw the rails ahead splitting beneath snow. Langston had thrown the switch behind him, sending their pursuit toward an unfinished spur ending at a ravine. The main line curved away toward Mercer Valley, carrying Langston's engine and the vault with him. Mercer grabbed the brake. Hold on! The engine shrieked as brakes bit icy wheels. Sparks exploded under the cab. Everyone slammed forward. Briggs cried out. Nathan grabbed the side rail with one hand and Whitaker with the other. The locomotive slowed, but not enough. The unfinished spur stretched ahead into darkness. At its end, visible through blowing snow, the track simply stopped. Beyond it yawned a rocky drop into Pine Gorge. Jump? Boone shouted. Mercer fought the brake. At this speed, you'll break your neck! Nathan saw the switch lever flash past on their right, half buried in snow. If someone reached it before the engine fully committed to the spur, the wheels might catch the main curve. Might. The distance was impossible. The timing worse. Nathan looked at the watch in his hand. Tick, tick, tick. Then he moved. Nathan! Whitaker shouted. Nathan leapt from the side of the cab into the snow. The impact knocked the breath from him and tore fire through his shoulder. He rolled hard, hit a rail tie, and nearly blacked out. The locomotive thundered past, still sliding toward the unfinished spur. Nathan forced himself up. The switch lever stood 20 yards away. He ran, his boots slipped, his lungs burned. Behind him, Mercer blasted the whistle again, a long, desperate scream. Boone shouted from the cab. Whitaker shouted his name. Nathan reached the lever and threw his whole body against it. Nothing happened. Frozen, he slammed his shoulder into it again. Pain exploded. Still nothing. The locomotive roared closer to the final split. Nathan pulled the pocket watch chain from his vest, wrapped it around the lever for grip, and leaned with everything he had. Come on! The lever groaned. The watch chain snapped. The switch moved. Iron rails shifted beneath snow with a brutal clang just as the locomotive reached the junction. For one horrifying second, the front wheels bucked between lines. Then they caught the main curve. The engine screamed sideways, throwing sparks and snow, but stayed on track. It thundered past Nathan so close, the heat struck his face. Then it was gone around the bend, slowing hard but alive. Nathan collapsed beside the switch, gasping. In his hand lay the broken pocket watch chain. The watch itself had fallen into the snow, its lid open, ticking steadily despite everything. Whitaker jumped down as soon as the engine stopped and ran back along the track with Boone behind him. "Nathan!" Nathan tried to sit up and failed. The judge reached him first, dropping to his knees in the snow. "Are you hurt?" Nathan laughed weakly. "Probably." Whitaker picked up the watch from the snow. The glass was cracked now, but the hand still moved. The judge stared at it, then at Nathan, and something deep and fragile passed between them. Not proof yet. Not family yet. But the possibility stood there in the snow, breathing hard. Boone arrived and looked toward the main line. Langston's getting away. Nathan forced himself upright despite the pain. "Then stop staring at me and get back on the engine." Whitaker shook his head. "You can barely stand." Nathan took the watch from him and closed the lid. "If Samuel Whitaker was my father, then I'm done letting Langston choose where this story ends." The judge looked at him for a long second. Then he helped him to his feet. The locomotive waited ahead, damaged but running. Mercer shouted from the cab that the boiler still held pressure. Pine Gorge yawned behind them, cheated of its victims. Far ahead, Langston raced toward Mercer Valley and the vault that could erase the last proof of 25 years of theft. Nathan climbed back aboard with one arm hanging stiffly at his side and the cracked watch ticking in his pocket. The chase was no longer only for evidence. It was for a father he had never known, a mother who had hidden the truth, and a name stolen before he was born. The locomotive roared through the night toward Mercer Valley, with its damaged wheels screaming against the frozen rails, and Nathan Cole stood in the cab with one arm burning from the fall, the cracked silver pocket watch pressed inside his vest, and a truth he could no longer push away, pounding harder than the engine beneath his boots. Samuel Whitaker might have been his father. The thought came in flashes as the train tore through snow-dark timberland. His mother's silence, the watch she guarded like a wound, Judge Whitaker's face when he saw the engraving, the corpse chained in car 47, the letter written to a brother that somehow found its way into Nathan's life. Across the cab, Judge Whitaker held onto an iron rail and watched him with the careful sorrow of a man who had spent decades seeking one lost family member only to discover another standing in front of him covered in coal dust. Neither of them knew how to speak about it while Victor Langston raced ahead toward the vault that could erase the last remaining evidence. Eli Mercer drove the engine harder than any sane man would have allowed, feeding pressure into a boiler that rattled like it might burst from sheer outrage. Sheriff Boone stood near the tender with two deputies, checking rifles and watching the bends ahead. Harold Briggs sat on a coal crate clutching Samuel's rescued ledgers to his chest as though paper could protect him from the bullets he knew were coming. "Lights ahead!" Mercer shouted. Nathan leaned out into the freezing wind. Far below, the track curved down into Mercer Valley, where an abandoned transfer station sat at the end of the old branch line beside a dark warehouse, a water tower, and a stone building half built into the hillside. Smoke rose from a locomotive already parked there. Langston had arrived. Mercer pulled the whistle twice, not as warning but as challenge. The sound tore through the valley and came back in echoes. At the transfer station below, men scattered like ants around lanterns. Some carried crates. Others hauled trunks from the stone building toward Langston's private engine. Nathan saw it clearly now. Langston was not merely burning evidence. He was moving what he could still save. "He's loading the vault," Briggs said, voice cracking. Boone turned to him. "How many men?" Briggs squinted through the snow. "Langston usually keeps 6 guards. Maybe more. How many exits?" "Main doors, rear freight tunnel, and a service passage through the hillside." Whitaker's eyes sharpened. "How do you know that?" Briggs swallowed. "Because I helped catalog the records once." Nathan stared at him. "And you never thought to mention the tunnel?" "I was hoping we wouldn't need to get shot from 3 directions," Boone muttered. "Hope is not a plan." Mercer slowed the locomotive as they entered the valley grade, brakes shrieking. The stolen private engine ahead began moving, black smoke thickening as its wheels turned. Langston was leaving. "He's pulling out!" a deputy shouted. Nathan saw men throwing the last trunks into a freight car attached behind the private locomotive. Victor Langston stood on the rear platform in a dark coat holding a lantern, his face illuminated for one brief second. Even from a distance, Nathan could see the fury there. Langston had lost Car 47, lost Samuel's body, lost the courtroom, lost the workers. Now he intended to escape with the money, deeds, and final ledgers before dawn. "Can we catch him?" Whitaker shouted. Mercer looked at the grade, then at the switch ahead, then at the engine pressure. "Not before he reaches the junction, unless somebody stops that switch." Boone looked forward. Another switch lay near the Valley Station. Langston's train was already crossing it, preparing to take the Southern Escape Line. If he passed fully, their locomotive would be trapped on the dead-end transfer track, while Langston vanished into the network. Nathan's body moved before his mind finished calculating. Boone grabbed his sleeve. "Don't even think about it." Nathan pulled free. "I'm done watching him choose tracks for everyone else." The train slowed enough near the station platform for men to jump without dying if luck was feeling generous. Nathan did not wait to learn its mood. He leapt into a snowbank, rolled hard, and pain exploded through his injured shoulder. He staggered upright, barely able to breathe, and ran toward the switch lever ahead. Langston saw him from the rear platform. Their eyes met through snow and steam. "Shoot him," Langston shouted. Gunfire cracked from the moving freight car. Bullets struck snow around Nathan's boots. He dove behind a stack of railroad ties, then crawled toward the lever as splinters flew over his head. Sheriff Boone and the deputies returned fire from their slowing engine. Eli Mercer slammed the brakes and brought the locomotive grinding beside the station, where workers jumped down and charged toward the warehouse with rifles and hammers. Nathan reached the switch lever on his knees. It was locked with a company chain. Of course it was. Everything Langston built had a lock on it. Nathan searched desperately for a tool and found only frozen ballast, a broken coupling pin, and the cracked pocket watch chain still hanging from his vest. The watch itself ticked against his chest. He pulled it free, stared at it for half a second, then used the heavy silver case like a hammer. Once, twice, 3 times. The chain lock dented. A bullet struck the lever post inches from his hand. Nathan hit the lock again with a cry that came from somewhere deeper than pain. The silver case cracked along its hinge, but the lock snapped open. He threw the lever with both hands. The rails shifted just as Langston's freight car reached the split. The private engine had already crossed, but the rear car loaded with vault trunks jolted violently, wheels screeching as the switched track pulled it sideways toward the transfer line instead of the Southern Escape. Couplings strained. Metal screamed. For one impossible second, the 2 cars fought different destinies. Then the coupling snapped. Langston's engine lurched forward without its evidence car, racing into the Southern line while the freight car rolled uncontrolled toward the station. Men shouted. Nathan scrambled away as the detached car thundered past him, showering snow and sparks. It slammed into a buffer near the warehouse with a crash that shook the valley. Crates burst open. Papers flew into the air like startled birds. The final records had been separated from Langston. Nathan lay in the snow, gasping, the broken watch clutched in his hand. Judge Whitaker reached him seconds later, half sliding down the icy slope. "Nathan, I'm getting tired of you shouting my name like that," Nathan rasped. Whitaker dropped beside him and saw the shattered hinge of the pocket watch. His face tightened. "You broke it." Nathan looked down. The lid hung crooked, the glass cracked worse than before, but the hand still moved. Tick, 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 still works. Whitaker closed his eyes briefly, relief and grief mixing across his face. Then gunfire erupted near the warehouse. Langston had escaped, but not all his men had gone with him. Several guards poured from the stone vault building, firing toward Boone's deputies and Mercer's workers. Briggs, despite every instinct for self-preservation, ran to the crashed freight car and began dragging ledgers from broken trunks before snow could ruin them. "Help me," he shouted. "These are original deeds." Nathan forced himself up and stumbled toward him. Whitaker tried to stop him, but Nathan shook his head. "Evidence first." Together they pulled papers, cash books, sealed contracts, and iron boxes from the wrecked car, while bullets tore into the wood above them. Boone and Mercer advanced on the vault building from 2 sides. The station became a battlefield of steam, snow, muzzle flashes, and shouted orders. One deputy fell with a wound to the leg. Mercer dragged him behind a water barrel and kept firing. Inside the stone building, one of Langston's guards tried to ignite a powder charge near the document shelves. Briggs saw him through the open doorway and screamed, "The vault!" Nathan grabbed a loose coupling hook and rushed inside before anyone could stop him. The vault chamber was colder than the outside air, its stone walls lined with shelves, trunks, deed boxes, and ledgers stacked in careful order. A guard knelt near the far wall, with a match trembling over a fuse. Nathan threw the coupling hook. It struck the man's wrist. The match fell. The guard lunged at him, and they crashed into a shelf of ledgers. Nathan's injured shoulder screamed. The guard was stronger, older, and armed with a knife. Nathan caught his wrist just before the blade reached his ribs. They struggled in the dim lantern light, boots sliding over spilled papers. The man snarled, "You should have stayed a track dog." Nathan slammed his forehead into the guard's nose. The man staggered. Nathan drove him backward into an iron deed box, then hit him once with the broken pocket watch still in his fist. The guard collapsed. Nathan stood over him, breathing hard, shocked by what he had done, and more shocked that the watch had survived another blow. Judge Whitaker entered moments later with Boone behind him. "Nathan." This time the judge said the name softly. Nathan looked around the vault. "This is it." Briggs appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. "This is everything." The shelves held the skeleton of the entire conspiracy. Mercer Valley Trust accounts, stolen payroll records, worker wage diversions, forged land deeds, lists of widows pressured from property, maps showing towns deliberately bypassed unless they sold cheap, private investor ledgers signed by Jonathan Langston and later Victor Langston. And in a locked drawer beneath the main desk, Judge Whitaker found a packet labeled S. Whitaker Final Disposition. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside was the final cruelty, a receipt for Samuel's confinement in Car 47, signed by Jonathan Langston, witnessed by a young Victor Langston, and marked with a note, "Watch unrecovered, woman escaped." Nathan felt the room tilt. Woman escaped. Whitaker looked at him. Mary. Briggs swallowed. "Your mother must have gotten away with the watch." Nathan leaned against the desk. The truth no longer circled him. It stood before him plainly. Samuel Whitaker had discovered the theft. Mary Cole had helped him. The Langstons had trapped Samuel, but Mary escaped carrying his watch and, likely, his child. Nathan's entire life had been the unfinished consequence of that midnight. Whitaker read the next page and went utterly still. There is more. Nathan did not want more, but the judge handed him the paper. It was a private report written after Samuel's disappearance. Mary Cole suspected pregnant. Recovery failed. Monitor if child survives. Nathan stared at the words until they blurred. Monitor if child survives. Not Nathan, not a son, not a boy. A loose end. A living risk. That was why the railroad framed him. That was why Langston panicked when the watch appeared. Nathan was not randomly chosen. He was the child they had failed to find 25 years earlier, now grown into a man working unknowingly on their own tracks. Boone removed his hat. Good Lord. Nathan folded the paper slowly. His face felt numb. All my life, I thought, not knowing my father was just bad luck. Whitaker's voice was barely above a whisper. Nathan. But they knew. He looked at the judge. They knew before I did. Whitaker stepped closer. Samuel would have found you if he could. Nathan looked toward the vault door, where snow blew in from the battlefield outside. He couldn't. No. Whitaker's eyes filled. But I can stand with you now. For a moment, Nathan said nothing. Then the distant whistle of Langston's escaping engine echoed through the valley, reminding them that the man responsible was still running. Boone turned toward the sound. He's heading for the southern junction. Briggs grabbed a map from the wall. If he reaches Junction City, he'll board the express and disappear by morning. Nathan closed the broken watch and placed it carefully in his vest. No. Whitaker looked at him. Nathan, we have the evidence. Not enough. It's enough to destroy him. Maybe. Nathan picked up the signed confinement receipt. But Samuel didn't die, so Langston could hide behind lawyers in another territory. Boone understood. You want him brought back here? Nathan looked toward the tracks. I want him to stand in front of the men he robbed, the judge whose brother he murdered, and the son he tried to bury before he had a name. Silence filled the vault. Then Eli Mercer appeared, soot on his face, rifle in hand. Langston's guards are down. Your engine's still hot. Boone checked his revolver. Then we ride. Whitaker looked at Nathan, and something like recognition passed between uncle and nephew before either dared speak the word. Together, the judge said. Nathan nodded once. Together, they gathered what records they could carry, sealed the vault under guard, and rushed back to the locomotive. Behind them, Mercer Valley Station smoldered with lantern smoke and gunpowder. Ahead, Victor Langston's engine screamed toward the southern junction and the last chance to escape 25 years of blood. Nathan climbed into the cab with the broken pocket watch ticking against his heart. It had survived fire, bullets, snow, and iron. So had the truth. Now both were coming for the man who thought time could be buried. The locomotive came alive again with a violent shudder, its iron body groaning as if it understood that the chase had become more than a pursuit of one fleeing man. It was carrying a dead auditor's truth, a judge's grief, a worker's stolen name, and 25 years of buried crimes toward the last place Victor Langston believed he could still outrun justice. Nathan Cole climbed into the cab with his injured shoulder stiff against his side and the broken silver pocket watch tucked inside his vest, its cracked face still ticking against his chest like a stubborn heart. Judge Samuel Whitaker followed with Samuel's confinement receipt folded inside his coat. Sheriff Boone checked his revolver. Eli Mercer leaned over the controls. Harold Briggs clutched the Mercer Valley records as though they might vanish if his fingers loosened, and two deputies loaded rifles beside the coal tender. Behind them, the stone vault was sealed under guard by railroad workers who had once feared even whispering against the company. Ahead through the Black Valley, Langston's private locomotive screamed toward the southern junction. He has 20 minutes on us, Mercer shouted over the engine noise. Maybe less if his boiler's weak, and if it isn't, Boone asked. Mercer shoved more speed into the old engine. Then we asked God to favor the heavier conscience. The locomotive surged forward, wheels biting into icy rails as sparks climbed into the night. Nathan stood near the open side of the cab and watched Mercer Valley fall behind them. The transfer station, the stone vault, the broken freight car, the scattered papers in the snow, all of it blurred into darkness. He should have felt triumph. They had found the vault. They had saved records. They had uncovered proof that Samuel Whitaker had been imprisoned, that Mary Cole had escaped, that Victor Langston had known about Nathan before Nathan knew his own father. But triumph would not come. Instead, there was a deep, raw ache inside him, the kind that forms when a life rearranges itself around a truth too large to absorb at once. Samuel Whitaker had likely been his father. Mary Cole had spent her life protecting him through silence. The railroad company had not merely employed Nathan. It had watched him, framed him, and tried to bury him as soon as the watch surfaced. He looked down at his hands, still black with coal dust and stained from the rail yard fight, and wondered how many years of his life had been shaped by men who saw him not as a man, not as a son, not as a worker, but as an unresolved problem. Judge Whitaker stepped beside him quietly. Your shoulder? Nathan did not look over. Hurts. You should sit. You should stop telling me what to do like we've known each other longer than a day. The words came out sharper than intended. Whitaker accepted them without defense. Fair. The engine roared through a curve, throwing both men against the railing. The judge steadied himself with one hand. Nathan expected him to retreat, but he stayed. Samuel was stubborn too. Nathan's jaw tightened. Don't. I only meant I know what you meant. Nathan finally turned. But you knew Samuel. I didn't. You had a brother. I had a watch and a mother who cried when she thought I was asleep. Whitaker's face twisted with pain. Nathan immediately regretted the cruelty, but not enough to apologize yet. Grief made men unfair. So did 26 years of questions. The judge nodded slowly. Then I will not pretend our losses are the same. That answer disarmed Nathan more than argument would have. Whitaker continued, voice low. But I will tell you this. Samuel loved truth the way some men love land or gold. If he loved your mother, and I believe he did, then he did not abandon her. And if he knew of you, he would have torn the world apart trying to reach you. Nathan stared into the storm. He died in a boxcar within sight of the town. Yes. And Langston walked free. Yes. Then don't ask me to be comforted by what he would have done. Whitaker fell silent. For several minutes only the train spoke. Then he said, I won't. That was the first answer Nathan could bear. Ahead, the rails straightened across a long frozen flat. In the distance, a flicker of red light appeared, moving fast. Mercer leaned forward. There he is. Everyone shifted. Boone climbed to the front of the tender. Can we close the gap? We're closing it now, Mercer said. But he knows the junction is near. Briggs scrambled forward with a map. Southern Junction has 3 lines. East goes to Cattle Country. South goes to Junction City. West crosses the river bridge. Boone pointed. Which one will he take? Briggs swallowed. South if he's smart. West if he's desperate. Nathan asked. Why west? Old bridge over Blackwater Gorge. Company abandoned it last year. Too dangerous for heavy freight. Mercer cursed. If he tries that at speed, he's gambling with hell. Whitaker's eyes narrowed. Would he risk it? Nathan watched the red light ahead. He already locked a man in a railcar for 25 years. Nobody argued. They pushed harder. The old locomotive shook violently as speed increased. Snow became needles in the wind. The red light ahead grew larger. Langston's engine was close enough now that Nathan could see the outline of its rear platform. A guard stood there with a rifle. Boone lifted his own. Down. The first shot cracked across the distance, missing wide. Boone fired back. The deputy beside him joined. Their bullets sparked against the rear railing of Langston's engine. The guard ducked inside. Langston's locomotive shrieked, and a plume of black smoke burst upward as it entered the final stretch before Southern Junction. Mercer shouted, He's throwing speed into the switch! Briggs looked terrified. He's going west. The junction lights appeared ahead, 3 red lanterns swaying in the storm. Langston's engine thundered toward the leftward track leading to Blackwater Gorge. Mercer grabbed the brake lever but did not pull fully. If we follow, we may die. If we don't, he reaches the bridge and maybe drops the engine before we catch him. Boone looked toward Whitaker. Whitaker looked toward Nathan. Nathan looked at the cracked pocket watch in his hand. Tick, tick, tick. Time, which had been stolen from Samuel, hidden from Mary, and weaponized against Nathan, offered no mercy now. Follow him, Nathan said. Mercer did not hesitate. Hold on. The locomotive screamed into the westward line. The curve threw Briggs into a crate and nearly sent a deputy over the side. Nathan slammed against the cab wall, pain ripping through his shoulder. Ahead, Langston's engine raced toward the gorge, its red rear lamp swinging wildly. The land dropped away on both sides as the track climbed onto a narrow ridge. In the distance, the Blackwater Bridge emerged from blowing snow, a long skeletal trestle spanning a gorge so deep that moonlight did not reach the bottom. Several support beams were missing. Others sagged. Warning signs leaned beside the track, half buried in snow. Langston's engine did not slow. He's mad, Briggs whispered. Mercer pulled hard on the whistle cord, not to warn Langston, but to announce pursuit to heaven itself. The sound rolled across the gorge. Langston's engine hit the bridge first. The trestle groaned. Nathan saw sparks shower from the wheels as the locomotive crossed too fast. Halfway over, a wooden support split with a sound like cannon fire. The rear of Langston's engine lurched. For one moment it seemed the whole bridge would fall. Then the engine cleared the far side, barely, swaying onto the opposite bank. Mercer slammed the brakes before their own engine reached the trestle. Wheels locked. Sparks burst beneath them. The locomotive slid, screaming, stopping only yards before the bridge entrance. Everyone fell forward. Steam engulfed the cab. Silence followed, broken by the distant clatter of Langston's engine fading beyond the gorge. Boone punched the side rail. Damn it! Mercer stared at the bridge. We can't cross that. Not with this engine. Nathan stepped down from the cab before anyone stopped him. Snow whipped across the ridge. The bridge stretched before him, damaged but still standing. rails gleaming faintly under ice. On the far side, Langston's red lamp vanished into the trees. There has to be another way. Briggs climbed down shakily. There is a lower service crossing 2 miles north, but not for trains. Horses only. Boone looked around at the empty ridge. We don't have horses. Nathan looked toward a small maintenance shack near the bridge entrance. Maybe not. Inside the shack, they found 2 railroad handcars, old but functional, used by repair crews before the bridge was abandoned. Mercer examined one, kicked the wheels, cursed at the rust, then nodded. It'll run. Whitaker stared at the bridge. Across that? Mercer shook his head. No. We'd die halfway. We take it back down the ridge to the service spur, then cut north to the lower crossing. Boone looked toward the dark line, where Langston had disappeared. He'll have a lead. Nathan grabbed one side of the handcar. Then we pump fast. They abandoned the locomotive under guard with 1 deputy and transferred the most crucial evidence into satchels. The rest remained locked in the cab. Nathan, Whitaker, Boone, Mercer, and Briggs climbed onto the handcar and began pumping. The small machine jerked forward, wheels clattering over icy rails, racing backward along the ridge, away from the bridge, before turning onto an old maintenance spur that sloped toward the river trail. The motion was brutal. Every pump sent pain through Nathan's shoulder, but he did not stop. Whitaker pumped opposite him, old arm straining, jaw set. Boone and Mercer took turns, while Briggs held the evidence bags and muttered prayers between gasps. The handcar flew down the grade through moonlit snow. Twice, they nearly derailed. Once, a fallen branch forced Mercer to leap down and kick it aside seconds before the wheels hit. At the lower spur, they abandoned the handcar and followed a narrow trail toward the service crossing. The Blackwater River roared below, dark and violent between ice-crusted banks. The lower crossing was not a bridge so much as a reinforced wagon path across a shallow bend, slick with frozen stones and half-covered by mist. On the far side, the southern road curved toward Junction City. If Langston's engine stopped at the old West Depot beyond the gorge, he could find horses or another rail connection. The group crossed the river on foot. Water splashed over boots. Briggs nearly fell and would have been swept away if Boone had not seized his collar. By the time they reached the far bank, everyone was soaked to the knees and shaking from cold. Then they heard voices ahead. Mercer raised a hand. The group crouched behind frozen brush. Through the trees stood the old West Depot, a small structure beside the track beyond the bridge. Langston's engine hissed nearby, damaged from the crossing. Victor Langston stood beside it with 2 guards and an engineer, arguing fiercely. "I don't care about the axle!" Langston snapped. "Get it moving!" The engineer shook his head. "Not without repair. We cross another mile like that, and the wheel breaks clean off. Then find horses." One guard pointed toward the road. "There are riders coming from Junction City." Langston smiled. "Good." Nathan's blood chilled. Reinforcements. Boone counted quietly. 4 visible, maybe more inside. Whitaker whispered, "We need him alive." Nathan's eyes stayed on Langston. Alive enough. Boone gave him a warning look. Nathan ignored it. They moved carefully through the trees toward the depot. Mercer circled left with Boone. Whitaker and Briggs stayed behind cover with the evidence. Nathan was supposed to stay with them. He did not. He moved right along the track, keeping low behind stacked ties and abandoned barrels. His injured shoulder throbbed. His boots were soaked. His breath smoked in the cold. Langston stood less than 30 yards away now, removing papers from a leather case and stuffing them into his coat. He was preparing to flee on horseback. Nathan stepped from behind the barrels. "Leaving without your freight?" Langston spun. For a second, surprise stripped the polish from his face. Then hatred replaced it. "You." Nathan walked closer. "You knew who I was." Langston smiled thinly. "I knew what you were." "Say it." "A loose end." Nathan felt the words land, but this time they did not hollow him. They hardened him. "Samuel Whitaker was my father." Langston's eyes flicked toward the pocket watch chain hanging from Nathan's vest. "Possibly. You signed the paper that left him in car 47. I witnessed my father's decision. And Mary Cole? Langston's face darkened. Your mother should have sold the watch and disappeared farther. Nathan's fists clenched. She spent her life afraid because of you. She spent her life alive because my father had more restraint than I do. Nathan lunged, but Langston drew a pistol. Enough. Everything stopped. The guards turned. Boone and Mercer were still too far. Whitaker stood from behind cover, horror on his face. Langston aimed at Nathan's chest. You should have stayed nameless. A gunshot cracked. Nathan flinched, expecting pain. Instead, Langston's pistol flew from his hand, struck by Boone's shot from the trees. Mercer tackled one guard. The second fired wildly toward Whitaker, shattering a depot window. Nathan rushed Langston. They collided beside the tracks and fell into the snow. Langston fought like a desperate man, not a gentleman. He clawed at Nathan's injured shoulder, driving pain through him. Nathan struck him once, then again, but Langston drove a knee into his ribs and rolled on top of him. You think blood makes you important? Langston hissed. Your father died begging. Your mother ran. You laid tracks for my company like every other fool. Nathan reached blindly and felt the broken pocket watch in the snow where it had fallen during the struggle. He grabbed it and slammed it against Langston's temple. The executive reeled. Nathan rolled free, seized him by the coat, and dragged him toward the rails. My father died leaving proof. My mother lived long enough to protect it, and I laid tracks you used to bury men. He shoved Langston down hard. Now those tracks bring you back. Boone arrived and pressed a revolver to Langston's back. Victor Langston, you're under arrest for murder, conspiracy, attempted murder, fraud, and enough railroad crimes to keep a judge busy through spring. Langston spat blood into the snow and laughed. You have records. You have anger. You don't have the money. Briggs stepped from behind Whitaker, holding up a leather case taken from Langston's coat during the fight. His hands shook, but his voice did not. Actually, we do. Inside were bearer bonds, bank drafts, deed transfers, and final account keys for the Mercer Valley Trust. Langston's laughter died. Whitaker approached slowly. His face held no satisfaction, only a terrible, quiet completion. Victor Langston, he said, 25 years ago your family chained my brother in a freight car and left him to die. Tonight you will return to Cedar Hollow in chains beside the evidence he saved. Langston looked at Nathan. You think this gives you a family? Nathan stood over him, breathing hard, the broken watch in his palm. For a moment the old wound opened again. Fatherless years, unanswered questions, his mother's silence, a name stolen before birth. Then Judge Whitaker stepped beside him. Boone stood on his other side. Behind them, Mercer held the guard, Briggs clutched the case, and the first pale line of dawn appeared above Blackwater Gorge. Nathan closed the watch gently. It still ticked. No, he said. It gives me the truth. Family comes after. The first riders from Junction City appeared on the road. But when they saw armed lawmen, captured guards, and Victor Langston in cuffs, they slowed. Some turned back. Others raised empty hands. The chase had ended not with a grand courtroom speech, but in snow beside a damaged engine, where a railroad worker finally stood over the man who had tried to erase him and discovered that time, once broken open, could still keep moving. By the time Victor Langston was hauled back into Cedar Hollow in chains, dawn had broken over the town with the cold clarity of judgment. The snowstorm had passed, leaving every rooftop, rail tie, wagon wheel, and church step buried under white silence, as though the whole valley had been washed clean for what was about to happen. Nathan Cole rode on the front platform of the returning locomotive, with one arm bound in a sling, coal dust on his face, dried blood at his temple, and the broken silver pocket watch tucked safely inside his vest. Judge Samuel Whitaker stood beside him, one hand gripping the rail, the other resting over the folded confinement receipt that proved his brother had been locked in car 47 by the Langston family 25 years earlier. Sheriff Boone rode in the cab with Victor Langston guarded between two deputies, while Harold Briggs sat near the evidence satchels, pale, exhausted, and strangely calm for a man who had spent years fearing the truth, and one night finally telling it. When the locomotive rolled into Cedar Hollow Station, no one cheered at first. The entire town had gathered in the rail yard: workers, shopkeepers, widows, children, teamsters, blacksmiths, clerks, and men from every railroad crew within walking distance. They had seen Car 47 burn. They had seen Samuel Whitaker's remains carried out under guard. They had watched an accused railroad worker leave town as a prisoner and return as the living key to a murdered man's legacy. Silence greeted them because some moments were too heavy for applause. Victor Langston stepped down last, wrists cuffed, coat torn, face bruised from the fight at the Old West Depot. Even in defeat, he tried to stand like a gentleman. Nathan noticed that first and hated him for it. Langston still believed posture could disguise rot. Judge Whitaker descended from the engine and faced the crowd. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he removed his hat. Every man in the rail yard followed. The station office door opened, and 2 railroad workers carried out Samuel Whitaker's wrapped remains on a clean canvas stretcher. The crowd parted without instruction. Judge Whitaker walked behind them. Nathan followed, though each step sent pain through his injured shoulder. The procession crossed the rail yard toward the courthouse, passing the blackened ruins of Car 47, where smoke still rose in thin gray threads. Nathan looked at the burned shell and tried to imagine his father inside it. Not as bones, not as evidence, but as a living man, writing in darkness, listening for rescue that never came. Anger rose again, but this time it did not blind him. It sharpened everything. At the courthouse, the emergency hearing resumed with the doors thrown open so everyone who could fit inside might witness it, and everyone who could not stood outside beneath the windows while clerks repeated testimony aloud. Judge Whitaker did not sit behind the bench at first. He stood before it, looking older than he had the day before, but steadier too. "Before this court proceeds," he said, voice carrying through the room, "let the record show that the remains of Samuel Whitaker, missing for 25 years, have been recovered from Western Frontier Railroad Car 47. Let the record show that documents found with those remains establish confinement, fraud, and conspiracy connected to the Langston family and company associates. Let the record also show that Nathan Cole, previously accused of theft and murder, is released from all charges pending formal dismissal, as evidence now proves those charges were fabricated to silence him." A murmur moved through the room, then grew into open approval. Nathan stood near the front with Sheriff Boone beside him. For a moment he felt lighter, but only for a moment. Being cleared of a lie did not restore what the lie had cost. It did not give Samuel back his life. It did not give Mary Cole back her peace. It did not return 26 years of Nathan not knowing who he was. Victor Langston was brought forward. His cuffs clicked softly in the silence. Judge Whitaker finally took his seat, but his eyes never left the man before him. "Victor Langston, you stand accused under territorial authority of conspiracy to commit murder, accessory to the murder of Samuel Whitaker, the murder of Benjamin Graves, attempted murder of Harold Briggs, attempted murder of Nathan Cole, obstruction of justice, forgery of warrants, fraudulent seizure of land, theft of payroll funds, destruction of evidence, and criminal operation of the Mercer Valley Trust routing scheme." Langston smiled faintly. "A dramatic list." Sheriff Boone stepped forward. "And incomplete," the crowd muttered. Whitaker leaned back. "Do you deny the documents recovered from Mercer Valley?" "I deny their interpretation." "Do you deny witnessing Samuel Whitaker's confinement?" "I was young." Nathan's jaw tightened. Judge Whitaker's face remained unreadable. "That was not my question." Langston lifted his chin. "I witnessed many company decisions in my youth. My father controlled the railroad then. If a man was confined, I did not order it." Briggs, seated under guard near the witness table, suddenly spoke. "But you maintained it." All eyes turned to him. Langston's expression sharpened. "Careful, Harold." Briggs stood slowly. His hands shook, but his voice held. "No, I have been careful for 5 years. Careful made me a coward. Careful killed Benjamin Graves. Careful almost burned Samuel Whitaker's proof. I am done being careful." Judge Whitaker nodded. "Mr. Briggs, step forward." Briggs walked to the witness stand, placed one hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Then he told everything. He described the false payroll accounts, the secret freight manifests, the private vault at Mercer Valley, the forged warrant against Nathan, and the order to move Benjamin Graves's body through unlisted railcar traffic. He named clerks, guards, bankers, contractors, and company lawyers. He explained how Victor Langston did not create the original scheme but inherited, expanded, and protected it. He admitted his own complicity. He did not ask for mercy. That made the testimony stronger. Langston tried to interrupt 3 times. Whitaker silenced him each time. Then Sheriff Boone presented the documents from Mercer Valley: the confinement receipt, the routing ledgers, the forged warrant, the final disposition report mentioning Mary Cole and her suspected child, and the bearer bonds recovered from Langston's coat. Each piece landed like a hammer. Outside the windows, the crowd repeated names as they were read aloud. Men who had lost wages heard where the money went. Families who had lost land heard who had stolen the deeds. Workers who had feared the company heard that fear had been designed, funded, and enforced like any other railroad system. Near midday, Judge Whitaker called Nathan forward. Nathan's legs felt heavy as he approached the stand. The courthouse had never seemed so full. He could feel every eye on him, but most of all he felt Langston's gaze, cold and hateful, still trying to reduce him to an inconvenience. Nathan placed his hand on the Bible. His injured shoulder throbbed. "State your name," the clerk said. Nathan hesitated. For 26 years, the answer had been simple: Nathan Cole, his mother's name, the only name he had. But now the room held Samuel Whitaker's letter, Mary Cole's secret, and the broken watch that had crossed from father to son without either man knowing. Judge Whitaker watched him gently, offering no pressure. Nathan finally spoke. Nathan Cole. Then, after a breath, he added, "Son of Mary Cole." His eyes shifted to the judge. "And, if the evidence proves true, son of Samuel Whitaker." The room went still. Judge Whitaker looked down for a moment, overcome, then nodded once. Nathan testified about his arrest, the courtroom, the watch, Car 47, the chase to Mercer Valley, the switch at Pine Gorge, the vault, the papers naming him as a surviving child, and Langston's words at the depot. When asked what Langston had called him, Nathan looked directly at the prisoner. A loose end, a low sound moved through the room. Anger given breath. Nathan continued, voice steadier now. That is what men like him call people when they want to forget. Those people have names. Samuel Whitaker became cargo. Mary Cole became a woman escaped. I became a child to monitor if he survived. Benjamin Graves became a body moved by freight. Workers became wages to steal. Families became deeds to forge. And when words make people smaller, it becomes easier to bury them. Even Judge Whitaker looked surprised by the force in Nathan's voice. Nathan turned toward the crowd. I laid track for that company. I gave it my strength. So did half the men outside. We thought iron made the railroad strong, but a railroad is only as honorable as the men deciding where it goes. His eyes returned to Langston. And your tracks led straight to a grave. Langston sneered. Pretty speech from a man who would still be swinging a hammer tomorrow if not for my family's railroad. Nathan stepped down from the stand and walked toward him before Boone could stop him. He stood close enough to see the fear beneath the contempt. No, Nathan said quietly. Tomorrow, I will swing a hammer if I choose. That is the difference. Langston's face twisted. You think this town will protect you forever? Judge Whitaker's gavel struck hard. Enough. But Langston laughed, louder now, desperate. You have one town, one judge too personally involved to matter, one frightened accountant, and papers lawyers will bury for years. You think justice happens because men cried over a watch? The words hit the room like ice water. Some faces faltered. Langston saw it and smiled. He was not wrong about power. He was not wrong about lawyers. He was not wrong that wealth knew how to outlast outrage. Then the courthouse doors opened. Everyone turned. A group of railroad workers entered carrying a long wooden crate recovered from the Mercer Valley vault. Eli Mercer walked at their head, face blackened with coal, eyes bright with satisfaction. Judge, he said, we found the company seal press. Langston's smile vanished. Mercer set the crate on the evidence table and opened it. Inside were metal dies, forged county seals, blank warrant forms, land office stamps, and several unsigned documents already prepared against new targets. Boone lifted one carefully. These include names from Cedar Hollow. Another worker placed a second box beside it, and this was hidden under the vault floor. Inside lay personal letters taken from workers, widows, clerks, and landowners, blackmail material collected for years. Fear turned to fury in the courthouse. Langston looked around and understood that the room had shifted beyond his ability to control. These were not old crimes anymore. These were crimes against people standing in the room. Judge Whitaker looked at the evidence, then at Langston. "You were saying?" Langston said nothing. By afternoon, a federal marshal arrived from Junction City after receiving urgent telegrams sent by Boone's deputies during the night. He took custody of Langston, the hired gunman, and several company officials named in Briggs's testimony. Additional warrants were issued for board members, bankers, and legal agents connected to the Mercer Valley Trust. The Western Frontier Railroad office in Cedar Hollow was sealed. Payroll funds recovered from the vault were placed under court supervision for return to workers. Land deeds were frozen pending review. For the first time in 25 years, the machine stopped moving. As sunset spread red across the snow, Judge Whitaker ordered Samuel's remains carried to the church for a proper vigil before burial. Nathan walked beside the judge through Cedar Hollow's main street while townspeople stood silently on both sides. No one knew what to call them yet. Uncle and nephew, perhaps. Survivors, certainly. Family, maybe, though that word still felt too tender to touch. At the church steps, Whitaker paused and looked at Nathan. "I wish I had found you sooner." Nathan stared at the watch in his hand. Its lid was bent, its glass cracked, its chain broken, but the second hand continued its stubborn circle. "I wish everyone had." Whitaker accepted the answer. "Yes." Nathan looked toward Samuel's covered remains. "Did he suffer long?" The judge closed his eyes. "I don't know." Nathan nodded, then whispered, "Lie to me next time." Whitaker's face crumpled slightly. "I am sorry." For the first time, Nathan heard the words, not as apology for one act, but for a whole broken history no one could repair. He slipped the watch into his pocket. "I know." Inside the church, Samuel Whitaker's letter was read aloud one final time. "If you find this, then truth survived longer than I did." Men removed their hats. Women wept softly. Railroad workers stood shoulder to shoulder where company executives had once stood above them. Nathan sat in the front pew beside Judge Whitaker, feeling the weight of the day settle into his bones. Justice had begun, but it had not healed anything yet. Maybe healing came later. Maybe it was slower than trains, quieter than courtrooms, less dramatic than arrests. Maybe it began with a dead man finally given his name back and a living man finally allowed to ask who he wanted to become. When the vigil ended, Sheriff Boone entered with one last telegram. His face was grim but not frightened. "Judge." Whitaker unfolded it. Nathan watched his expression change. "What is it?" The judge read aloud. "Territorial Rail Commission will convene full inquiry in Cedar Hollow within 7 days. Federal authority recognizes emergency evidence seizure. Protect all witnesses." A murmur of relief moved through the church. Boone smiled faintly. Looks like Langston was wrong about one town not mattering. Nathan looked around at the workers, widows, clerks, deputies, and townspeople who had stood through the longest day Cedar Hollow had ever known. Then he looked at the watch. Still ticking. Maybe one town is where it starts. The Territorial Rail Commission arrived in Cedar Hollow 6 days later beneath a sky so clear it seemed impossible that the town had nearly torn itself apart only a week earlier. Snow still covered the fields and rooftops, but the atmosphere had changed. The fear that once hung over every conversation had begun to lift. Railroad workers no longer lowered their voices when discussing company corruption. Shopkeepers no longer glanced nervously toward the station office before speaking. Widows whose land claims had been stolen carried copies of recovered deeds. Families who believed lost wages would never return suddenly had receipts proving otherwise. Justice had not finished its work, but for the first time in decades it had begun. Nathan Cole stood beside the church cemetery overlooking Cedar Hollow as workers prepared a grave beneath a large oak tree. Samuel Whitaker would finally be buried under his own name. The simple wooden marker resting nearby carried words chosen by Judge Whitaker himself, Samuel Whitaker. Brother. Father, Truth Keeper. Nathan stared at the inscription for a long time. The word father still felt strange. Not wrong, just unfamiliar. A week earlier, he had not known who Samuel Whitaker was. Now he knew more than he ever imagined possible. He knew Samuel had loved truth enough to die for it. He knew Mary Cole had risked everything to protect their child. He knew a silver pocket watch had crossed 26 years carrying a message that neither time nor corruption could destroy. And he knew that some wounds healed slowly because they were not meant to disappear. They were meant to become part of the person who survived them. Footsteps approached behind him. Judge Samuel Whitaker stopped beside him, holding a small wooden box. The older man looked tired. But it was the fatigue of someone finally setting down a burden he had carried too long. "The commission hearing starts in an hour," the judge said. Nathan nodded. "Langston? Federal custody? Still talking?" Whitaker smiled faintly, mostly complaining. That earned a small laugh from Nathan. The judge handed him the wooden box. Nathan opened it carefully. Inside rested the silver pocket watch. It had been repaired as much as possible. The cracked glass remained. The dent from the fight remained. The hinge still showed scars. But it worked. The ticking sounded steady and strong. Nathan looked up. "You fixed it." Whitaker shook his head. "The town watchmaker fixed it." Nathan ran a thumb over the engraving. "To my brother, Samuel. May truth survive longer than we do. Maybe we should leave the crack." Whitaker nodded. "I thought the same thing." They stood in silence for a moment. Then the judge spoke again. The commission reviewed the family records. Nathan looked over. Whitaker's expression was careful, hopeful, nervous. "And?" The older man inhaled slowly. "They found enough evidence to formally recognize Samuel Whitaker as your father." Nathan felt the world pause. Not because he doubted it anymore. Deep down, he had already accepted the truth. But hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way documents never could. Judge Whitaker continued. "The court will allow you to retain the name Cole if you wish." Nathan looked toward the town below, toward the rail yard, toward the church where his mother once prayed, toward the station where Samuel's remains had finally come home. "I will." Whitaker nodded. "I thought you might." Nathan closed the watch carefully. "Mary Cole protected me my entire life. I'm not giving her name away." The judge's eyes glistened slightly. Samuel would have been proud of that answer. Later that morning, the commission hearing filled every available seat in the courthouse. Federal investigators presented evidence recovered from Mercer Valley: account books, forged deeds, secret freight manifests, payroll diversion records, witness testimony, signed authorizations. The conspiracy that had operated in shadows for 25 years was finally exposed under full daylight. Victor Langston sat guarded between federal marshals. He looked smaller now, not because the chains changed him, because the truth had. Men who depend on secrets always shrink when the secrets disappear. Harold Briggs testified again, this time without fear. He admitted his own failures and accepted responsibility for his silence. The commission recommended leniency in exchange for cooperation. Benjamin Graves received official recognition for his investigation. Samuel Whitaker was posthumously cleared and honored. Multiple railroad executives were indicted. The Mercer Valley Trust was dissolved. Stolen funds began the process of being returned. Confiscated land deeds were restored to rightful owners. By sunset, the findings spread across the territory through telegraph offices and newspaper presses. Cedar Hollow became the center of a story much larger than itself. The railroad worker who had been falsely arrested, the judge who recognized a pocket watch, the murdered auditor discovered inside a forgotten railcar, the son who unknowingly carried his father's proof for 26 years. That evening, the town gathered for Samuel Whitaker's burial. Every railroad crew attended. The church bell rang slowly across the valley. Snow sparkled beneath lantern light. Nathan stood beside Judge Whitaker and Sheriff Boone while the minister finished the final prayer. When the service ended, people began leaving quietly, one by one. Families, workers, deputies, children. Eventually only a handful remained. Sheriff Boone removed his hat and looked at Nathan. So what now? Nathan smiled faintly. Tomorrow? Tomorrow. Nathan glanced toward the rail yard. The tracks still need repairs. Boone laughed. You just helped expose the largest railroad conspiracy in territorial history? And? And you plan to go back to work? Nathan looked down at the watch. Someone has to keep the trains running honestly. The sheriff shook his head and walked away laughing. Judge Whitaker remained. The cemetery had grown quiet. Stars appeared above Cedar Hollow. The old man finally spoke. You know you have family now. Nathan looked over. Whitaker seemed almost embarrassed saying it, as though he feared asking for too much. Nathan considered the words carefully. End of Crete. For 26 years, family had meant one person, Mary Cole. Now the definition felt larger, stranger, but not unwelcome. Yeah, Nathan said softly. I think I do. Neither man said anything more. They did not need to. The silence between them no longer felt empty. It felt earned. Months later, spring arrived in Cedar Hollow. New grass replaced snow. Railroad workers rebuilt sections of track damaged during winter. The station office reopened under new management. The old company signs disappeared. The town slowly healed. Nathan continued working on the railroad, though now as a supervisor responsible for safety inspections and route maintenance. Judge Whitaker visited frequently. Sometimes for official business, sometimes simply for dinner. The relationship grew naturally, not because papers declared them family, because they chose it. One afternoon, Nathan stood beside the tracks watching a passenger train disappear into the western horizon. He removed the silver pocket watch and checked the time. The repaired mechanism ticked steadily in his palm. He smiled. Truth had survived longer than Samuel Whitaker, longer than Jonathan Langston, longer than Victor Langston's lies, longer than fear, and perhaps that was the point all along. The watch was never meant to preserve the past, it was meant to guide the future. Nathan slipped it back into his vest and turned toward home. For the first time in his life, he knew exactly where that was. If you enjoyed this story of courage, family, hidden truth, and frontier justice, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let us know in the comments, what was the most powerful moment for you? The judge recognizing the pocket watch, the discovery of Car 47, the truth about Samuel Whitaker, or Victor Langston finally facing justice? Your support helps bring more emotional cowboy stories and unforgettable Western adventures to life. And remember, sometimes the smallest object can carry the biggest truth. We'll see you in the next story.